God almighty, isn't it nice just to do nothing for a change?
Yeah, I mean, it gets a bit weird after a couple of days, but it was nice for a couple. Yeah, it's all right. I've got, I mean, the volume 2's kind of.
Yes.
I'm waiting now for the printers to confirm that they're happy with the files, and then get the test printing through, and then start with fulfillment. So
fantastic! Oh, yeah, that's brilliant stuff. I mean, I was thinking about it earlier because I was writing the second half of my first article.
Yeah.
That the second one I'm going to put trigger warnings, content warnings all over it.
Yeah.
All over it because the stuff in that one. But it's going to have to be 3.
Right.
3, this introductory one, because it's already like it's about 12 pages long.
Yeah.
That's what it's crazy nonsense. I don't know where it's all coming from, but it's good, you know.
Welcome to the show, man.
Right. Like... it's so weird. Like up until quite recently, my early 20s felt quite recent.
Yep.
But looking back for the purposes of this essay, it's like it may as well be Alien.
Yeah. It's weird, isn't it? It's further away than you think.
Another time, another person entirely. I almost don't recognize that person, you know?
It's one of the strangest things, I think, for me about the project and about memory in general, really. Like, it is visceral, and yet it's not actually... It's not really metaphorical to say it happened to somebody else. It really did.
No, it's absolutely true, isn't it? How often? I mean, like, it's physically true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, how often is it? Like, every cell in our body replaces itself. Is it like every 10 years or so?
The story is every 7, but I don't know if
every
that's
7.
Whether it's believe it or not. So.
It's accurate or not.
Yeah.
But even like on a physical level, it's kind of not true. Like the delusion of continuity.
Yeah.
Because of the way our perceptions work, right? And because of the way our minds work, the way we operate in reality, may not be true itself, right? If you look at certain theories of how time potentially works and whatnot. So we may be, I mean, that fascinates me, that whole thing that we're actually like these big walking cemeteries of our own ghosts.
Yeah, absolutely. And how, like, I mean, for me also, like, very closely related to that is how memory works. You know, the fact that we don't remember things, we retell things.
Yeah. We narrativize and mythologize and then embellish them, even when we think we recall things very clearly. That again, it's absolutely fascinating because it means that we are constantly operating within, like, something fundamentally mythic. Our conditions are narrative, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just, you know, that's a function of who we are as creatures. That's a function of our biology and of our particular, like, the biochemistry of our brains and how they work, you know.
Absolutely.
And look, it's in a lot of ways, it's a very wonderful gift. You know, it's not all bad by any means.
No, it's a fascinating one, isn't it? Because like everything in humanity, I mean, if I had a byword for like fundamental humanity, a synonym, it would be ambiguity, because that's what it is, right? It is ambiguous. I mean, there is a part of me, certainly, like the old part, funnily enough, the part I was talking about in this essay, the part that is nihilistic and misanthropic and despairing, which looks at it as a curse. You know, it's cruel in a way that matter has evolved to this state where it can narrativize itself but never realize what that is. You know?
Yeah.
That is a cruel thing. We can imagine and we can tell stories of better states, of better conditions, of more profound conditions, but never actually inhabit or realize them. And that is a source of profound existential anxiety for us, I think. But it's not entirely that. That's the trick, isn't it? That's the trick, you know?
And sometimes we really can inhabit it for periods of time, or an individual, or in small collectives or whatever. Like, it can be done.
That's it. That's it, isn't it? It's we need that in order to be able to create tomorrow. It's necessary, right? In all of its evil as well, in all of its disappointment, you know? I mean, I think for many of us, I can only speak personally because I only know my own mind, but a fundamental aspect of my own anxieties and my own depressions derive from that disappointment. They derive from the fundamental disappointment that reality, not just society, not just culture, but reality isn't better, you know, than it could be.
I mean, yeah, physics is pretty cruel.
Yeah.
I remember. I mean, look, I don't have a lot of time for him these days at all. But one of the times I remember, Dawkins back when he was, really first coming on the scene, and when he was dealing with. I mean, not to rehash it because you and I have talked about it before. But, like that opening moment in the 90s when he discovered and was discovered by fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, right? And there was a moment of kind of mutual loathing as the two schools of thought eyed each other up and realized that they were kind of mutually exclusive and very bad. And look, in that particular narrow fight, I'm always going to have Dawkins' corner over the Born Again.
Totally. I mean, because he was right. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, given what he's become later? But there's no doubting that in that particular dynamic, there's a right and wrong answer.
Exactly. I remember. And at the time, I remember feeling that there was a kind of, I mean, I don't know about this now. I think it was maybe arrogance, but they felt there was a kind of courage about it. Because I remember at a press conference, he was asked about, he said, the problem with matters of life after death, he said, is that they run smack bang into the laws of thermodynamics. And it makes it quite difficult because when someone says that you're attacking their faith or you're casting aspersions on the memories of their dearly departed, it's like, well, no, I'm not saying your great aunt isn't living on. I'm saying that the laws of thermodynamics suggests it's probably not. You know what I mean? Like, and it's saying it. It's just
fascinating. I mean, personally, because of the way I look at this, I wouldn't have gone down the physics route. But it seems to me that in that particular instance, where they're saying that somehow you are disrespecting dead relatives by denying their continued existence, I would say exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. The insistence upon their continued existence is to benefit the living.
Yeah,
it's got nothing to do with the dead person. It isn't respecting them at all. To make them into these weird, narrow puppets, like these Elysian puppets, where they are just like cartoon characters, where they're frolicking in some heavenly pasture somewhere. That's for the living, right? And that's not who human beings are.
It never made any goddamn sense to me too. It's like you'd be reunited with your mum and dad. Okay, but will they be the same age they were when they died? Will they be my age? Like.
This bothers me. This bothers me about parochial notions of the afterlife, right? I mean, again, another person who I'm not as fond of as I used to be, but Stephen Fry, he said he did his tour of the USA, for the BBC, and he went to Utah, obviously, and he went on a guided tour around some of the Mormon churches and whatnot. And the guide said something along the lines of, "Oh yes, we believe that in the afterlife we're going to be reunited with all of our loved ones and all of our relatives." And Stephen Fry piped up and said, "Yes, but what happens if you were good?" And it's funny, but the thing is, you've lived that life, right? You've had those dynamics, you've had that experience. Why on earth would you just want a repetition of the same condition and the same relationships over and over and over again? Again, it's for the living, isn't it? It's for the sake of the comfort of the living. It's got nothing to do with the dead people, right?
I mean, I will say, actually, it was a sentence I didn't think I'd be saying tonight. In defense of Mormonism, I mean, it's an interesting one because the Mormon afterlife for the Mormon believers is actually pretty cool. You do actually become a god. You get your own world.
As they go, it's actually quite good.
That's actually, there's an incentive there. And the interesting thing about...
I can get that, like as a vision of the afterlife, where you become something other, right? You transcend.
You ascend to a divine plane. You become divinity yourself. You get your own planet. You get to be God on your own planet. I mean, that's kind of. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's cool, I guess, if that's what you're into. But I mean, the thing about Mormonism that's interesting as well is that in their conception, there's actually very few people go to hell under Mormonism. It's really interesting. If you're a true believer, you get to become a god. That's nice. If you're not, though, what happens is you basically you just go to a version of purgatory. And then eventually you get into heaven after you've been there for a couple of thousand years, and you go, "Oh no, the Mormons were right," and then they let you heaven. Okay. So that's okay. No, the only people who go to hell in Mormonism, which is where the wheels start to come off a little bit, are ex-Mormons.
Which is problematic, right? Which is enormously
And it's
problematic.
like, oh, I think I see what you did there. You know,
Does that include those portions of the porn industry, particularly the gay porn industry, that have made like Mormon porn, which is literally, I shit you not, that is actually a subgenre of gay porn
no, of
at
course
the
you're not.
moment.
This all kind
It
gay
really,
porn.
yeah, it really is.
Is that Kingdom of Heaven program with the guy from Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield? Has that just set a load of people? Because he's a good-looking boy. He just set a bunch of people off, has it?
Apparently so.
Okay.
But no, it is. There is a subset of gay pornography which is like Mormon fetishism. It's so weird. It's so weird.
Under their doctrines, you're probably okay as long as you didn't actually believe in Mormonism in the first place. I think you're probably all right. Oh, you're not gonna go to you're not gonna become a god, but you'll get into Mormon heaven eventually. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okie dokes. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a joke, but I can almost understand visions of the afterlife or concepts of an afterlife that have that kind of thing included, because there is some transcendence of condition.
Yeah.
Right. But when they are very parochial and it is just like, oh, it's going to be like this, and you're going to be feeling the same things, you're going to be experiencing the same emotions, like terrestrial attachments and love and all of that. I'm like, well, why? Why? Because those are products of our biology, like it or not,
Yeah, no, exactly.
And if that biology is gone and you're in some other condition, then why would it be the same? It doesn't make any sense to me. And why would you want it to be the same?
Yeah, it's a really for me, that's where the wheels start to come off, because you start to what it actually portrays, I think, is a failure of imagination on the part of the people who came up with this. Because you're like, wait a minute, if I'm not being driven by any of the current biological impulses, and yet there is still something that is somehow me, that somehow survives. It's unmeasurable by any kind of scientific method. But okay, but let's say it's this. Let's say it's like a version of ultraviolet that we can't see and we can't detect. All right, okay. There's a vibration that's me that somehow exists after my body falls over. Why is it going to be anything like me now?
Right.
It's not going to be cold. It's not going to want a beer.
It's exactly that. It's like when you get mediums and they always say the same fucking thing, which is they're very happy. And I'm like, what does that mean? What do you mean? No human being is very happy. It doesn't work like that. Human beings are not stick figures. They're not crayon. If we're anything, we're like drawn on water. We're so complex and fluid and different. We're experiencing so many emotions and states at the same time. So even as a human being, that doesn't make fucking sense. You're talking about some other order of entity, right?
Yeah.
What do you mean very happy? Why would I want to know that? I don't give a shit about that. Ask them the important questions. Ask the important questions.
Like, what can they see right now? Like, what does it look like? Does it even look? Because we're not got eyeballs anymore, right? So how does one register one's surroundings? Like, what are your sensory inputs and outputs?
Exactly that. What is the condition? What is going on? What condition do they inhabit? Are they light? Are they some, I don't know, whatever, are they waveform or something? I don't know. Tell me that. That's the interesting stuff. But all the bullshit about it's a pantomime for the living. And I hate it. I'll be honest, I fucking hate it. I'm very intolerant of that bullshit. I really am. But my intolerance goes quite far. About this time last year, my grandfather passed away. Obviously, that was very, very sad. I loved my granddad. He was an amazing man. The funeral, it was fine because it wasn't for me. It's not for me. It's for everyone else.
Yeah.
In general, I hate funerals. I hate funerals, not because I find them morbid or anything like that. I just don't believe in them.
Yeah.
I fundamentally don't believe in them. I find them to be pantomimic. I find them to be disrespectful, often to the person who's died, because they paint this pantomime of them that isn't real. Often to the people who are grieving, because they're expected to grieve in public and to talk to people they don't really know about emotions that are really raw and really complex. And it's like, no. Leave people alone. Let them grieve. This often commercially driven pantomime where you're expected to have these gatherings and whatnot. It's like, no.
It's also like, I don't know. For me, the big problem is that the completely kind of artificial bromide that gets offered at that time in terms of religious comfort. I mean, I wrote about this for, I think the bonus essay in the volume 1 edition was about, well, I know it was about a friend of mine that I lost as a teenager. It's kind of the first kind of, I guess, first person that I knew kind of my own generation that died, and it was a really strange thing where he was maybe 3 or 4 years older than me, so he was in his early 20s, and he just died in his sleep. No rhyme or reason, no underlying heart condition or illness that anybody knew about. He wasn't big into drugs. He wasn't,
sudden adult deth syndrome.
Yeah, and it was just surreal, and he was a lovely guy, and a big part of that friend group at the time. And of course, we were all devastated by it,
obviously.
But I remember vividly that funeral. God, I think I put part of the scene. I may have put it in Godbomb. I may have given it to Alex because I was so angry.
Yeah.
When the priest did this thing about, like, I know this guy was taken from you all unexpectedly.
Yes.
And you may feel that there were things that you wanted to say to him that you didn't get a chance to do. And now, through the power of God, I will give you that opportunity. And I was just like, get the fuck, man.
Exactly that,
Like, I mean, it was bad. By that point, I've had 10 minutes of this guy who clearly knew nothing about my friend trying to tell me about my friend, which was already like, just fuck off, man.
Absolutely.
I could tell you now, he would have zero time for your bullshit.
Exactly.
That. And then that line came out, and I was just incandescent, because to me it felt exploitative. To me,
exploitative. It's inappropriate. It's insulting, isn't it? It's insulting to all parties, right?
Yeah, and it was just like,
the dead person themselves. It's so disrespectful.
Like, don't be prostituting my dead friend to try and get me to believe something I don't fucking believe in that he didn't believe either. Like, just get the fuck.
Exactly.
Really.
And it's the industry, of course, as well. I mean, that's the other thing that's built up around it. It's the funeral industry, which, I mean, I've spoken to my friend Tom, who is now no longer a priest, by the way. He's done. He's had enough. Yeah. Oh my God, the stories. He used to tell us what he shouldn't tell us when he was a priest. But
so is this Tom that we spoke to for our show on Midnight Mass?
Midnight Mass,
Wow.
He's still, he's in fact, he kind of quit because of his faith in a way, I suppose. Just doesn't.
Yeah, it can go that way.
He doesn't agree with what the church is doing anymore. He finds it repulsive. I mean, it's but the stuff. I mean, it's dead. The church is the Anglican Church is dead. It's done. It's dead as ditch water. Give it a couple of years, and it's over. It's over. But it's the money and everything that's in it. He finds it just repulsive, utterly repulsive. But yeah, he has had long discussions, because obviously when he was a priest, he was deeply involved in this stuff.
Yeah, of course.
But he's had long discussions about the funeral industry, which he loathes. He absolutely loathes it, because he says there is no governing body. There's nothing. They gather together and decide like their own prices and what funerals are going to be. What are we going to prescribe in culture that we want people to do to make more money from the dead? And he hates it. He advises when he was a priest, he advised his parishioners on alternative ways of doing that are more respectful, where you don't have to spend up thousands of pounds on nonsense that doesn't mean anything. I
mean, I know it's a comedy, but honestly, to that moment in The Big Lebowski where John Goodman's character is like haggling with the guy over the urn. It's just like, it's a great, because it is funny, and obviously Goodman's character is a gigantic raging arsehole in that entire movie. But that particular moment, you do have a certain amount of sympathy for Walter. You really do. Absolutely. The moment when he yells out, "Just because we're bereaved, it doesn't mean we're saps." Just like, fucking right, man. It's absolutely true. Somebody said it.
It's absolutely true, and it's the fact that it's an industry that relies on shame as well as bereavement.
Yeah,
So,
shame, misery. Just when you're at your weakest, your most vulnerable, your lowest. Yeah, no,
that's it. Like you've got to, like, if you don't do this, if you don't have all of this, then you are disrespecting you are disrespecting your dead relative or your dead friend or whatever, and you are also going to be ridiculed. Somehow you're going to be looked on as lesser by your relatives or your friends or whatever. And it's like, no, I have zero time for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as emotionally manipulative, but like the fucking wedding industry is just as bad. Terms of like there's this weird thing that happened. I actually started talking about it when the missus and I were planning our day. You know, I actually started talking about the wedding tax. Like, you want to book a venue for a party, then you book a venue for a party and it costs a certain amount of money, right? And you say, right, I want a DJ, I want drinks, I want this, and then if you at any point say the word wedding, they just triple the fucking price.
Yeah,
bang,
just arbitrarily, right?
And it's just like, what the fuck is it? The one that nearly got me, the one that I swear to God, I was like, let's just call the whole fucking thing off. So when they were going to charge us, like, it was literally 20 quid for seat covers per seat cover. Like, a fucking seat cover. What? I'm like, wait a minute. So we've already got the chairs, yeah. So okay, firstly, why are the chairs so fucking ugly that they need covering up, given how much money we paid? Secondly, 20 quid, unless I get to keep them, right?
As a souvenir, you've got like a line of people coming out.
Why do I want 20 seat covers from my wedding? Like, what am I going to make out of them afterwards? What the fuck is this?
I mean, do you have like a communal bonfire with them, maybe? Like, do you burn them all?
What the fuck? Like, I'm building something scary out of them. I don't know what, man. You know,
a fort, right? Like a kid's fort, yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is, and it's based in as well. It's based in a certain weird kind of patriarchy as well, because that industry targets women. It targets straight women, doesn't it? It really does. And again, it's based in shame and one-upmanship and materialism. It's this notion that somehow if you don't have the day and if it's not perfect, then it's somehow a reflection on you or the marriage or the way you're going to be seen by your peers, because this person had this wedding and they had all of this and this person had this wedding. Yeah, I'll be honest, I fucking hate weddings too. I really hate weddings. I think I hate weddings more than funerals, to be honest, because funerals you can go, you can just leave, you know. Weddings are a bit trickier. The best wedding I ever went to was my friends Ray and John. Their wedding was fantastic because they've been together. They only got married because it's like, well, they've been together for like about a decade at that point, and it was like,
wasn't so much like a marriage as a kind of like a statement of surrender, right? It was like, well, that's it. We're fucking stuck with each other. We might as well make it official.
Fine, may as well, you know, just to for tax purposes and whatnot.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, it's a consideration.
They spent £200 on their entire wedding. Ray turns up in a brown corduroy suit with a yellow shirt and a white tie and undone tennis trainers. John turns up in a sort of weird kind of like Hessian suit that's got a tartan pattern on it. Again, tennis shoes. And, you know, it was so brilliant, honestly. At the registry office in Dudley, there were only like 12 of us there. And the lady doing the ceremony was like, do you have rings? Nope. Do you have any vow? No. It was the best wedding I've ever been to. Yeah. And you know why it was the best? It wasn't because of that. It's because it was sincere.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It was sincere. I'm such a fucking arsehole sometimes, honestly. I really am. I'm like a fucking splinter in the flank of reality sometimes. I sit there at weddings, like traditional weddings, sit there often with a drink and sort of like think, what is this?
Yeah.
What is this pantomime that I'm taking part in this uncomfortable suit? I don't believe in this. I don't believe that most people believe in this. I think it's this lack of sincerity that concerns me more than anything.
Yeah, I think it's easy to lose sight of what it is that you know what the kind of the point of it is, really. Exactly. Or the cynic in me says that it's a deliberate ploy to obscure what the point of it is in some cases.
I've always said if I meet the right guy and
Yeah.
we do get married, then the actual wedding itself, I want to elope. I want to just go somewhere, drag two people off the street as witnesses, because you know what? I will be sure then.
Yeah. No, I get you.
It's not for other people, because you know what? That's another thing that weddings are for, isn't it? They're for other people.
Yeah, because they are.
They're for the mother and father of the bride often.
Yeah.
That's the truth, isn't it?
It can be that way, yeah.
It's a lot of the time. I think that's what it is, you know.
Well, all that other stuff you talked about. It's an expression. It's a weird expression of status, and it's you know, a kind of audio materialism on a bad day. It can be really unpleasant, and then you know, and then sometimes it can be lovely too. I mean,
don't get me wrong; they can be fun. They can be really
quite fond of ours. I think ours was quite good, but that's because we made it our own. You know, like we both had the things we wanted to do. And like my band, I played at my own wedding.
Right,
my band did like an hour-long set. It was awesome.
That's awesome. That is like, fun.
Best audience you're ever going to get. Like they can't leave. Probably the most people we ever got in a room, actually. And it was great. Awesome. The guitarist had so much fun when it was his wedding. We did it again. You know, we played his as well. So yeah,
that's brilliant. I mean, like, that is exactly it. It's not weddings per se. I think like the actual celebration can potentially be great.
Yeah.
They can be enormous fun, and when they are bespoke and they're like they're their own thing. They're not like this what you said earlier, this like keeping up with the Joneses. Well, this friend or this sister had this wedding, so I've got to have this wedding too. I think they can be brilliant. I think they can be loads of fun, but they are rare.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that you were saying about like you found weddings harder going than funerals. I mean, it is a tricky one, isn't it? I always think like generally at weddings the booze is slightly better. So well, on the other hand, they're longer.
Yeah, so that's where I tend to ensconce myself. It's at the bar.
Yeah. Well, it's always that thing. Like the thing about weddings, I always think is when it gets to like it's like whatever, like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and you're drinking Pimm's, and you're thinking, why don't I do this every day? This is actually like this is great. And then you get to like 5 o'clock, and you're still surrounded by people you don't know very well, and there's another 2 hours of speeches to go, and you're like,
Well, I mean, you know, one of the fun things that gay guys can do is gather at the bar and play Spot the Closet Case. So you know, that's fun.
Yeah. How many times is it the bride or groom? Yeah.
Well, it's you'd be surprised. You know, you'd be surprised. Maybe not. I don't know. You know, it didn't. Yeah. If not, or like, you know, what degree are they sort of by? Is it sort of like, do you think they're on Grindr? I bet. How many pings am I going to get if I open it up? A lot would be my guess.
Yeah, one or two.
One or two. Yeah. Definitely from the guys who have like women on their arms. That's so common. I mean, I still don't think most straight people understand, or like straight identifying people understand the amount of people you don't know are bi.
Yeah.
Is unbelievable.
Well, I think the amount of bi people in very deep denial about the fact that they're bi is really interesting. I mean, like there was I don't know if did you watch the It's a Sin, the Russell T Davies thing?
I only watched it once because it really upset me, but it's very good.
So the one for me that really got me in that was so you remember like at the end you had the Welsh guy, and the whole thing was like, well, he hasn't slept with anyone, how come he's got it, right?
Yeah.
And then you suddenly have that flashback to that summer he spent in that house. Now that other guy, the guy that he was with in that scenario, he would deny he was, well, he did literally deny he was gay to his last breath, right? And yet, you know, and it's like there's so much of that. I mean, that amazing speech they gave to Kitty Horsey was absolutely magnificent as this like personification of evil.
Yeah,
as the kind of ostensibly caring mother, but that line about they boys, they just rot, don't they, when they get to you? And it's like, wow, lady,
yeah, wow,
do you not understand human sexuality?
Like at all,
Okay, then. Like, and it's just, but it's when you hear that and you think, wow, yeah, that's an entire mentality, and that won't just be her. Like there will be guys walking around who see themselves in that way. You know what I mean? Like they're
absolutely yes,
like,
yeah,
wow.
It's kind of an issue in gay culture in many respects, and has been for a long time, which is like I mean, it's an odd thing because it's both an issue and not. It's our over sexualization by culture.
Right.
Which trans people also deal with as well, because trans people often find themselves to be fetish objects for straight culture. That's generally true too.
There's this whole thing about chasers, right? There's this whole kind of subculture for trans women about. I mean, I say trans women, I assume trans men as well, maybe, but about people are very into that.
I mean, I don't know, but I would assert that trans women get it more.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
I would assume so, because they tend to be the material or the subjects for straight men or straight identifying men. That's the truth of the matter. It's a really interesting phenomena. Again, ambiguous as all hell, right?
People forget about it too, right? But it's something like Steve Coogan was making jokes about this back in the Alan Partridge days.
Right.
Partridge had this whole riff about ladyboys, right? Yeah. I don't find them attractive. I just it's so strange, And it's like, Alan, all right,
yeah,
and I mean, Partridge is interesting because he is a caricature, but he is also expressing a very real thing.
Yes.
Like every time I see Richard Madeley on the fucking television, I'm like, that is actually Alan Partridge.
Yes.
They are the same person.
Increasingly so. He seems to be like devolving into a comedy sketch character without understanding that it's happening to him, right?
I really wouldn't mind if I didn't know for a fact that he earns more in a week than I do in a year. Spousing that shit, like that's the bit that bothers me.
Well, there's a whole rabbit hole here.
It's like, do me a fucking favor.
There is a whole rabbit hole here because Madeley is a microcosm. He is is emblematic.
He's a morbid symptom.
That's it, of a real disease in British culture, which is we just allow people who have the platforms the right to have the platforms. We don't question it. Right?
It's mediocre, middle-aged, middle-class white guys, man. What the fuck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's the same thing with Piers Morgan. It's like, how the fuck has that guy got a career?
Yep.
Like, lest we forget, this is a guy who got kicked out of the Mirror for publishing front-page photographs of British soldiers torturing Iraqis that turn out to be 100% fake.
Oh yeah,
how do you have a job in media after that? How do you ever work in this town again?
He should be in jail, shouldn't he?
Like, get the fuck.
That's the truth. He should be in jail. Clarkson is the same, right? Should be in jail.
Christ.
Should be in jail, yeah? After hitting that guy at work, he assaulted someone at work. Should be in jail. That's
How many assistants do you have to punch before you stop being like Flavour of the Month? It's fucking
exactly
ridiculous.
that. There is nothing like the UK for failing up. There's nothing like it. If you're in the right circles, you can do what you like. You can get away with what you like. That's the truth of the matter. It's the Savile effect. It's the Rolf Harris effect. It's the Prince Andrew effect. It's everything, It's everything wrong with our culture. That's it. You can do whatever you like if you're in the right circles. And the thing is, you will believe it too.
Yeah.
Like Madeley is so self-assured in his blithe ignorance, right? He has the platform. Doesn't seem to understand that he is a mediocre daytime television presenter. That's it. He doesn't have any expertise in anything.
No.
Anything.
No.
But feels as though he can ask Mick Lynch whether he's a Marxist, as though that has as Mick Lynch himself said, what has that got to do with what has that got to do with the price of fish, Richard?
Great. I think
have you ever read the manifesto? No, you haven't.
That's the way you want to reply to him under those circumstances. I tell you what, you define for me what a Marxist is, and I'll tell you if I am one. How about that?
Ask him. You want to ask him? Well, what do you mean, Richard? Define your terms. What type of Marxist?
Marxist, Leninist, Trotskyist, Stalinist. What do you mean when you say Marxist?
What do you mean? But also, what interpretation of Marx are you using? Have you read Raymond Tallis or something? And of course, he will flap. And he'll get angry, as he did with Mick Lynch. Because he couldn't, as they all do with Mick Lynch, because Mick Lynch is just so down the line, right? He's just so down the line, and he doesn't allow for the soft-balling, euphemistic bullshit that pervades our discourses. He just doesn't allow for it.
That we mistake wisdom. I mean, it's fucking opposite world at the moment. It's crazy.
It is insane, isn't it? It is absolutely cray right now. I mean, Glenna's back. Speaking of people who have I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and I apologize to anyone but for this statement, but I can see him. We were talking about how you could just see him at home, can't you, alone in his cold house, like having a spiteful wank, to the masses of trans women porn that's on his computer. Oh, I hate you so much. You could just see it, can't you? He is that stereotype, right?
I mean, there is a version of the timeline. I don't know if it's true because I've never paid. But he was. I mean, this is a guy who was very online for a very long time, and he has experienced online brain rot, as happens to some people. Wow. But like, there is a version of the timeline where he was at one point a lot less transphobic than he is now, and he was interacting with trans. And there is at least one version of the timeline from that say at some point a trans woman actually turned him down, and that's kind of what really flipped him over.
For him in particular,
I can't discount that might be what's going on.
There is something, isn't there? There is something with him because it's so extreme. And it manifests in such an extreme way. It's not even like, it's not serpentine like a lot of the bigots are, It's not like they hide behind euphemism and they pretend. He doesn't. Yeah. He is just full out batshit crazy hatred, right? Like mad fetishized hatred. It's so strange.
I can't remember, but I think it was someone on Twitter saying like it surely got to be a source of contention amongst the trans exclusionary radical feminist movement that their principal admittedly unofficial, but clearly their principal unofficial spokesperson is the most divorced man in the world.
Right.
How the fuck did that happen? Except of course it makes perfect sense.
Of course it makes sense.
Because you're an outcropping of patrarchy, and this is what patriarchy looks like.
And of course, as is always revealed, I mean, he escalatingly is just an old conservative misogynist ultimately.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he's starting with the biphobia now.
I know. Please, Graham, tell us in the LGBTQ community how being queer. Please tell us, because we're dying to know, Mr. Divorced White Straight Man.
How queer is queer enough, Graham?
Yeah, how queer is queer enough?
having a wank over a trans woman, is that queer enough, Graham?
Yeah, right. Is that enough for you? We don't want you, by the way.
Mate.
Let's make that very clear. If you are a TERF, if you are, we're going to exclude you. We're going to make up a euphemism for our group, which is excluding you. Yeah.
It's just awful, man. He's just so. I mean, the one that did it for me, where you just know you're beyond parody. And if I hadn't seen the clip, I would have assumed it was a joke. But I actually saw him say this with his own mouth. He said, it's part of some interview he was doing. Somebody said, even now, he said, I'm even starting to doubt what's going on with climate change.
Yeah.
And you just think, brain rot. There you go. There you go. Right there. Yeah. I've now got to the point where I'm rejecting science and actually the evidence of my own fucking eyes and ears. Because I really am that crazy now.
Because all the science isn't on my side, right? None of it is. So you are done. It
turns out I'm the religious fanatic the whole time, and
it's the "Are we the baddies" moment, isn't it? It really is.
It really should be. Yeah.
It should really, you're absolutely right. That should be the moment where something twigs, where something goes, right? Where you're like, you have to have that incredible moment of doubt, where any halfway considered or sane person would.
And it is interesting. There is evidence that there's some arguments happening now inside the TERF movement. There are some concerns amongst some of them about some of
the figures. That a lot of their leading figures seem to be cozying up to out and out Nazis.
Yeah,
and fascists, self-defined fascists.
Yeah, and that's useful, because I think that they do need to see that, because that should be a de-radicalization moment.
Yeah,
for anyone sane who considers themselves to be on the left, whether they are or not. That's the moment. That should be the moment where you say, "Hang on a minute, they should not be standing shoulder to shoulder with these people under any circumstances."
Absolutely.
But, I mean, that said, when you look at the funding for the TERF movement, and it has always come from far right reactionary, again, actually evangelical Christians in America and groups, it's like, well, you've always been in the pocket of the bad guys.
Yes, it's absolutely true. The LGBA, the so-called gay and lesbian bisexual alliance, which is like 70% like straight white people.
Yeah, it's actually straighter than the population, I think.
Yeah, it's their like, degree of straightness is greater than the general population. Did you see that photograph they put up of one of their gatherings recently?
No.
And people were dragging it across because first of all, it was small, but second of all, every single one of them was over 50, every single one of them was white, and every single one of them was straight.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the only thing that it is more than straighter is whiter, right? I mean,
exactly, right. Exactly that.
White. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. I mean, like, just topsy-turvy, crazy, amazing stuff. It is fascinating, though, watching Glinner harassing all of the other comedians that he used to be, like, in with.
Right.
And the way they're responding, which is, you are batshit.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing with, it's the same Queen with like, Queen Rowling and that whole thing. Like, all that the Potter kids have ever done, all that, Radcliffe and Emma and the rest of them have ever done is say, we support trans rights. That's all they've ever done. They've not even had a go at her. They've never even named her. They've just said, actually, we think trans people have a right to live as trans people, and that's fine. Yep. Just the bet, like, that's it, right? Mm-hmm. And for that, you get these crazed headlines about, ungrateful and stabbing her in the back and all this shit. Just
that's an interesting one, isn't it? Ungrateful.
She's not their mum. You know that, right?
She is not. And, her involvement with her involvement with the films is fairly minimal,
Yeah, I mean, mainly it's about cashing the checks, right?
Absolutely.
I think early on, there in the first couple of movies when they were making them, there were a couple of things because the books hadn't been finished, had they?
Yeah.
So there were the odd thing when they say we want to change this, and she'd say you can't because of book 7, which hadn't been written yet. So all right, so there was a bit of, but that's it, really.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's not nothing. But on the other hand, but does that mean hang on? Does that mean if I as an actor, if I perform in a piece that's written by someone, I owe fealty to their political views from now?
Yes, forever and ever. It's unhinged, isn't it? It's an unhinged position to take.
I think if you look at the history of Hollywood, that's going to create some interesting problems.
That's going to create some issues, isn't it? Yeah, really is. I mean, Weinstein.
Well, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. That's a place you can
because
start.
By the same logic, all those women who have actually, come out about his rapine activities should keep their mouths shut, right?
Right.
Right.
How ungrateful
bitches, right? Ungrateful bitches. How dare they? How dare they stand up to Daddy Harvey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Made them all that money.
Made their careers. How dare they? Same logic.
Yeah, exactly.
Same logic. From these rad femmes, right? The new face of feminism. Amazing, right?
I just think, that's the one. I understand why they came up with the phrase trans-exclusive, exclusionary radical feminism, but there's really nothing fucking radical about this bunch.
Not at all. No, it's old-fashioned conservatism in a new face. That's all it is.
It gives them way too much credit to call them radical. There's nothing radical.
No, it's absolutely true, and feminist, in fact, because they're not. They're just not. Yeah. I mean, they reveal themselves more and more by the people they attack and by the people that they ally with.
You know what I've realised? Really, what it has brought into relief for me. Supremacy is always a dead end. As soon as and it doesn't actually matter what the supremacy is. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the overriding supremacy we all have to deal with right at the moment is patriarchy, and it is, it is male and it is white, and those supremacies are currently ascendant, and they are, damaging millions of lives and have to be fought and have to be, But actually, it just turns out if you switch your supremacy from men to women, guess what? You still suck. It's actually not good.
It's not a healthy
way to be in the world. Yeah, you don't have as much power as the patriarchy. Congratulations, but you are still kind of being a dickhead.
Absolutely. And it turns out that by buying into the systems of supremacy, you are just another face of the patriarchy, ironically,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most amazing thing.
Yeah. No, and again, it's the we always end up back here, don't we, in this conversation? But it's the it's the scraps from the table mentality. Ultimately, it's the scraps from the table mentality when what you should be doing is overturning the entire fucking table.
That's it. Up tipping the feast, yes.
Yeah,
and preferably like hurting some of the diners along the way. That would be good too, tipping them out of their chairs, you know.
Yeah, or if you want the religious metaphor, drive them from the temple. But I mean, like that's
a good
point
one,
we're at. That's the point we're at right now. That's the moment in history we're at.
Oh yeah, absolutely, we are.
And again, the other version of it we always say is like, and the reason you do that as opposed to going for scraps on the table is if you continue to be an accommodationist, if you continue down the line, you are still going to end up in the same fucking cattle cart as the rest of us.
Exactly that. It is.
We know how the story ends.
Yeah, and it's disappointing, isn't it? Because a lot of people who are quite extreme in terms of their condemnations of certain other power structures that are abusive often tend to be accommodationist in this particular area.
I knew the game was up when they said we can side with the anti-abortion movement because this is more important right now, and fight them on that afterwards. You look at what happened to Roe versus Wade and say, well, you fucking walked into that, didn't you?
Yeah. And you know what the funny thing is? Did you look at the voices that were raised highest and most powerfully against that? They were trans women.
Yeah, that's right.
The TERFs almost universally, certainly their most prominent members, certainly in this country, were almost silent.
I'll say this. I was having a conversation with a family member who's in the Labour Party, and it was actually, she's middle-aged, and I realised I actually didn't know her views on this particular issue. And I was a little bit nervous because, there's a bit of turfiness going on in the Labour Party right now.
Yeah.
And I got about halfway through my first sentence of something about trans women and the current situation, and before I got halfway through the sentence, she cut me off and said, trans women aren't the enemy, patriarchy is.
Hey!
Okay. Why can't Wes Streeton fucking say that? Like, that's it. That's it.
Right. That's it.
Next story. And you don't need to say anything else. You don't need to do that. You get it.
Yeah.
I'm cool.
That's it.
Let's go.
That's exactly it. And never
underestimate. Don't get. And that's such a basic failure of logic.
Yeah.
For quote unquote feminists,
they don't understand that they're attacking other women. So all the people who are genuinely misogynistic and patriarchal are sort of like, oh, look at them, look at them go. Oh, we're gonna wind them up and we're gonna get them fighting one another. Brilliant, yes. So there's that. They are useful dupes for the right, for patriarchy, for conservatism, for misogyny, genuine misogynists who just want women to be like sex and broodmares. That's it. Very useful. And also it's an attack on all of us too in the LGBTQ community. There is absolutely no coincidence that like homophobic assaults are up like something ridiculous, like 500%.
No, this is it. This is it. That's it, and it's all fun and games, but like people are getting killed. There's shootings in nightclubs in the States right now, and drag shows getting attacked. I mean, drag, for fuck's sake.
I know the most harmless thing in existence, drag. I mean, for fuck's sake. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Anywho, that was, as our introductions go.
It's been, it's been maybe a month since we talked. I think we shouldn't leave it so long because there's clearly.
Because it happens, doesn't it? It happens. We get going, and then that's it. But you know what? I think that was a really good introduction to this particular, and of course to this channel, because I'm hoping, of course, ladies and gents, this is going to be up on the Our Lives in Horror channel, which is an adjunct to the Exaggerated Elegy channel. For those of you who've joined us from over there, Kit. You all know Kit from. What the hell is wrong with us, and the Books of Blood, and Season of the Crow, author of the Finite, and so many other things. Kit, and he also has his association with all of this, what's going on around here, right? So, I mean, really, what I wanted to do with this project, what I'm hoping to do, is get, you started the My Life in Horror project, which I love because of its. I love this notion of like taking a deep dive into what informs us. That's my stuff. That's my jam. I love that. What I'm really hoping to do with this particular project is get as many horror creators as I possibly can, and I'm going to try and broaden it out as well. I would love to get some artists and even like music creators or whatever. whatever art or medium they happen to be involved in. And I want to take a deep dive into it. I mean, we're always asked, aren't we? We're always asked the question. You must get this all the time. I get this all the time. I think most people who operate in horror, whether they're a fan or a creator or both, get this all the time. People ask you, why horror? Right?
Yeah.
It's one of the de rigueur questions, isn't it? It's one of the, people will ask you that all the time, and they'll very often ask you, especially if they know you to any great degree, they'll ask you in this slightly puzzled tone.
Yeah,
isn't that right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, there's normally a sort of an air of kind of bemusement around the question, or
because they're not asking what they think they're asking. That's the truth of the matter, isn't it? As is often the case with like human beings. They're not really asking what they think they're asking. They're not actually asking, why do you like horror? What they're asking is, what they're actually stating is, this kind of conflicts with my impression of you. My assumptions of what horror is and what people who like or create horror are conflict with what I feel you are.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I mean, it's an interesting one because it's pure anecdote, but from what I understand from friends I've got who write in other genres, have been to conventions of other genres and so forth. I mean, it's a cliche, but I think it's true. Like the horror genre as a whole, there are bad actors and people of bad faith in any kind of grouping, but taken as a piece as a whole, horror writers seem to be some of the nicest people, most friendly, welcoming, kind people you'll ever meet. I mean, it just seems
to be generally true, doesn't it? I mean, again, it's anecdotal, but that's certainly my experience of being part of the horror community. There's so many just really genuinely lovely, warm, friendly people. I mean, I went to Lex Jones's Halloween party last year.
Right.
Brilliant. I met Justin Park there. It was great. It was just brilliant fun. It was really lovely to actually meet people face to face and to find so warm, so welcoming, and that it does seem to be generally true, doesn't it? It seems to be a generally true thing that people who indulge in this darkness, in this subject matter, and are sort of willing to express themselves through it. It's almost as though we get something out, or it's like we exorcise something, or express something that maybe the general population does not, or doesn't have the means to.
Yeah, and it's a tricky one because anytime you do this, you're generalizing, and when you're generalizing, you're running all kinds of risks.
Yeah, it's true.
But certainly, like, to keep it personal, I know for me, it's clear to me that there is some kind of, I mean, there's a lot going on, but part of what's going on is it's some kind of safety valve, right? It's some kind of pressure valve release. That's part of what's happening, whether I'm creating it or whether I'm reading it. It's something about the safe, and I'll put the word in inverted commas because how safe it is, I don't know, but it's a safe way to experience really unpleasant things. I was thinking about it with King, because obviously King's a touchstone for me. One of my earliest kind of encounters with written horror, still one of my all-time favorites. And I was rereading Cujo, I think, 2 or 3 months ago.
Nasty book, isn't it?
It really is.
It's a nasty book, that one.
But I remember I was interviewing Pete McLean. He came on Writeopolis, and he's the author of the Prince of Thorns quadrilogy, which is this crime fantasy, fantastic set of books. But he was talking about how the thing about King is his books are never about what they say they're about. It's like, and Cujo's a great example, because I was literally reading it as he, I was halfway through reading it as he was talking, and I was like, yeah, Cujo, it claims it's about a rabid dog, but it's not. It's actually about a woman having an affair and the husband finding out, and a very, very ordinary, mundane horror. And at the time, I was about a third of the way through the book, and there's this sequence in Cujo where the adulterer, the guy she's been having an affair with, who's a pretty nasty piece of work, writes a letter to the husband telling him that he's been shagging his wife. And King just lets the letter sit on this guy's desk all day while you follow this guy around his mundane meetings. And it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's so horrible because it's this sort of, and it's such a, the thing that's brilliant about that particular moment, and you know, the rabid dog shit's brilliant as well. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. That's good.
Really fucking good. But that is just, it's such a, there's a lot going on with that, right? There's the mundanity of it. This is something, a version of which happens every single day. Someone finds out that a partner that they thought was faithful is not. That just, it's a fact of human existence. It happens all the time. And for those people, it's kind of the end of the world every time it happens.
Yeah.
Like, it's devastating.
Yeah.
So there's that. It's a mundane horror. There's the way that King just lets it sit there. This is not the horror of surprise. This is the horror of anticipation.
Yes, yeah.
You, the reader, feel like shit for page after page after page after page, because you are going to have to watch this guy read this letter, and you already know what it says because you saw the guy write it. Like, the genius of that. Like, that's a kind of malicious, emotional torture, right?
Well,
really.
That's a really interesting point as well, because again, when people are asking this question, like, why horror, another thing they're kind of asking is, why do you expose yourself to material that elicits emotions that most people would consider to be negative, that are ostensibly negative, like this, like you said, this torture of not only the horrific situation of the woman and her child trapped in a car by a rabid dog, but also this very identifiable domestic horror that's going on alongside it, which of course is going to be associated, because almost everyone has some association with that, with being cheated on, or even being the cheater themselves, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, one of the things that King does that's so good in that is there's a lengthy part where he explains the affair from the wife's point of view. And it's brilliant, because that's horrible too. She feels terrible about it. She feels bad about herself. She feels bad that she's done it, but she did it, and she knows why she did it. And it's like, that is, you know, that's rough. You know, it's really, and he just goes there, like, he doesn't hide from it, and he does that thing of, like, because the cardboard cutout thing there is just to make her a two-dimensional bitch, right? Just make her selfish,
right, to make her the bad guy, effectively.
And like, King just will not do that. Like, there's no way. So instead, it's just like, you just have to deal with this character that you kind of like, who, and it's kind of, you know, you kind of think, like, she's kind of made a mistake, really.
Yeah.
Really, that's kind of what's happened. I mean, she's chosen to make the mistake. She has agency. It's not happened to her in that sense, but still, it's like she's made a bad choice. She's made bad decisions, and you think, well, I don't know anyone that can look themselves in the mirror and say they've never made bad decisions.
I think that's a really good point, actually. Again, it's a very good answer for the unspoken question as to why this material. Why do you want to immerse yourself in in human darkness and in human filth, you know? And it's because horror is one of the few genres where I think if it's done well, if it's written well, it doesn't hide.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's it.
It allows you to experience these situations and these emotions in as you said, in a kind of virtual space, a fictional space where there is no consequence for you outside of the page other than the vicarious emotion that it arouses. And it allows you, if you're looking for a sort of functional answer, it allows you as the reader, and indeed as the creator, if you're writing it, to work through those emotions.
And there's something I want to hit on here, because this is really important, something that I've seen in discourse recently, and this is something that's coming out more as we kind of explore fiction and what it is and how it works. So I think it's an important conversation. But one of the dead ends I've seen some people go down is that there was apparently some psychological study that suggested that when it comes to your physiological reactions to a highly emotional piece of art, whether that's horror or romance, it doesn't matter, but something that makes you feel, your physiological reaction apparently is pretty much identical to the physiological reaction you have when something really happens.
Right. Interesting.
And the dead end that some people were going down with that, which I think was entirely wrong, was to say, well, therefore, actually, maybe we shouldn't actually do this shit in fiction, because we are actually inflicting trauma, and that's maybe not a good thing. And my thing was like, hang on, what you're missing there is you're describing a physiological response.
Yeah.
Now, our physiology is incredibly powerful, and it's actually it's one of the reasons I like horror, is because it's one of the things that horror often explores, is physiology.
Yeah.
King writes very well about physicality, and I think that that's something that a lot of other horror writers can miss out on, and I think it really matters. We live in our bodies, but we are not entirely our physiology.
We
do have a consciousness, we do have imagination, we do have a brain, and you can put yourself through something emotionally via fiction, and you know it's fiction. At that point, what you're doing is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you are exerting control in a situation over circumstances and with feelings that you don't normally have control over.
Yeah, and it's an odd argument anyway.
It's an amazingly powerful thing to do, I think.
Isn't it an odd argument to come at it from that perspective, the notion that somehow because a piece of art is powerfully emotionally arousing in some way, that we should not create it, or you should not experience it? Because it's not an argument that people would raise for other genres, I find. Is it? Well, other forms of fiction, you know?
No, you'll see it. You'll see it talked about with music. I mean, that I don't think it's any different from the moral panic of the 80s and 90s about metal and hip hop. I think it's the same thing. And horror always gets bundled in with that, like whatever. Every time there's some massive scandal, you know, God forbid if any of the perpetrators had a horror DVD or a horror book on the shelf, then
of course that's it, right?
The genre gets hit in the neck. But equally, no, because it's rooted in the same ignorance, and I think the same fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology and how it works. The idea that we are, you know, the idea that we're slaves to our physiology.
Yeah.
The idea that we can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality. I mean, that's really what you're saying with that.
That's ultimately it, isn't it? That is ultimately it. But there's also this suggestion that negative experience and negative emotion has no worth.
Yeah, but I mean, to do that, you've got to first unpack what you mean by negative, and that's,
of course,
that's already. Then you see, I start to run into difficulty because, like, the classic example of the negative emotion of anger, and anger's often presented in opposition to love, right? You have love, which is the positive thing. You have anger, which is the negative, destructive thing. And it's like, for me, I mean, firstly, that's a false binary.
Yeah,
you know, I find that often the anger that I experience in the world is very much informed by my love for
exactly
within it, you know, and my, you know, my love for people and my anger at the injustices that they suffer. That's actually a core component. The anger wouldn't exist to the same degree without the love. So it's already a false binary. I think.
That's true.
You know, but also, anger is very powerful. Anger is very dangerous. That doesn't necessarily mean it is always, in all respects, negative. It can be incredibly galvanizing.
Absolutely.
Can be incredibly motivating. In exactly the right circumstances, it can be life-saving.
Yeah, in exactly the same way that, as we all know, love can be incredibly corrosive and destructive, no matter how sincerely felt it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's not the emotion itself, right? It's the circumstances and their manifestation.
Yeah, and look, and how you act on it, and how you don't, and when you do, and when you don't, right? And how much control you have when you do, and all of that stuff. I mean, there are many variables at play here.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a weird thing, isn't it? I mean, love is a very particularly interesting one. Like, most of us will have the experience of being in love, for example. Yeah. And isn't it weird that I always find that when I'm in love, which is rare, it's like a drug. And it distorts everything. And I don't understand that it's distorting everything until it's gone, until it's over for whatever reason. So it can be this reality warping, or rather this perception warping factor that very often can create very, very powerfully negative situations.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, you know, I think familial love's another really interesting place to look at for that, because, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's arguably the organizing principle of our society is familial love. And I happen to have been blessed with a loving family, and that's an incredible thing. And I'm very grateful for that. But, you know, you don't have to go very far. I mean, my wife works in social care.
Right.
And you really don't have to go very far at all to see examples of where the notions of and structures of familial love become deeply exploitative and dangerous and damaging and harmful.
Yeah.
And that's not to say familial love is inherently bad. I don't believe that. I happen to think it can work very well. But it is to say that it's not as straightforward as saying it's just a good thing.
No, you're absolutely right.
Those same bonds, if they're not nurtured in a positive way, or if one person in the relationship is willing to exploit them or manipulate them, consciously or unconsciously, they can become, horrendous things.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, go back to the that initial question, which is like, why horror? I mean, you can be quite flippant about it, can't you? In many respects, not in a in a cruel or mocking way, but you could ask, well, do you watch something? Do you watch the news, for example?
Yeah.
Do you watch the news? And do you read newspapers? Very often, the answer will be yes, and then the only thing we can do really is kind of like shrug, because it's like, well, that whatever it doesn't matter how far we go, it doesn't matter how extreme or how repulsive or how grotesque or morally reprehensible what we write or describe is, it will always be fiction.
Yeah, we are making shit up at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. It's a waking nightmare, right?
Yeah.
What you're reading of in the paper is way worse. Even the minor evils you read about in the paper or watch or see on the news are way, way worse because they're real.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting, wasn't it? Because they will. I mean, sometimes for me anyway, some of the stuff I write might be triggered by something I read in the paper. Like it'll be a jumping off point. But again, so there's a different thing maybe slightly different thing anyway for me when I'm talking about the act of creation as opposed to the act of reading, or I don't like the word consuming. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that word really.
No, it's an odd one, is it? Because it suggests corrosion, doesn't it? It's cancerous,
Well, and it suggests like absorption, but it's not really like that because
it's not right, is it? No,
it's still there afterwards.
And there's also like I don't know. There's like a sort of predator prey or scavenging relationship implied, which is or fungal even, which is odd. Well, it's an odd word.
Or capitalistic, and fuck that.
Yeah, you are right. It's a strange. What would be more appropriate? Like the experience of, or
something like that. I don't know.
Anyway, sorry. Go on.
No. But certainly, I mean, what I've realised. I mean, actually, funnily enough, my life in horror taught me it. Although I'd intuited it for a while, is whether it's fiction or non-fiction. When I'm writing, the act of writing for me is always an attempt to make sense of something. That's what drives me. It's not the same for everyone. People are driven by different creative impulses, but that's mine. That's one of my overriding creative impulses. Alongside, occasionally, sometimes, can I do this? Which I think is always a fun question to try and answer.
Do you do that thing where like you go back to something that you wrote maybe like a couple of years ago or something, and you didn't realize what you were expressing at the time, but you read it and then you think, oh, well, that's what it was about. That's what I was trying to work out. That's what I was trying to express.
I had an absolute doozy with that one. When I was working on the My Life in Horror Volume 2 manuscript, which I had to do in a real frenzy because I was trying to get it out for December. And I was reading through, so I was writing the last couple of essays, but I was also going through, having put them in chronological order, and I was editing them. And I got to the one I wrote about XCOM, about my obsession with the XCOM video game in in kind of late 90s. And this crappy like 386 PC, and it was the only game I could run on it. No, I couldn't even run Wolfenstein. I wouldn't even run Wolfenstein, but it ran out. It wasn't even called XCOM. It was called UFO Enemy Unknown.
I gotta remember that one.
Set in the far off future of 1999. By the way, that was when the game started. And but the whole article, I'm writing about my obsession with the game, my ongoing, occasionally obsessive relationship with video games, and there's a lot of language of addiction stuff in there, and it was I'm quite hard on myself. It's quite heavy going, and it's really expressing this frustration. Why am I like this? Why does this? Why do these things get their hooks in me? Why do I get these kind of obsessions and so forth? And in between writing that essay in whenever it was I wrote that, probably 2019, so maybe 3-4 years ago, wherever the fuck we are now, and then editing it, I've had a diagnosis for ADHD.
And
rereading that essay was just like, holy shit, dude.
There it is, right? There's the frustration, there's everything. Yeah, wow.
And the kind of internalized self-loathing kind of, all of it's there. And it was like, I actually had a real tough decision there, because part of me wanted to scrap the entire thing, and just rewrite it. But then I thought, actually, what makes more sense is to leave it, but then add a chunky postscript that says, this is what undiagnosed ADHD looks like.
You are self-diagnosing, right?
And this is what it feels like.
Utterly brilliant. Utterly
brilliant. Obviously I didn't know what I was trying to make sense of then, because I didn't have any of the tools at that point to understand that what I was experiencing were ADHD symptoms.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just like, Jesus fucking Christ, I do this and it drives me nuts.
I don't know why. That's an amazing factor, I find, of writing. Like, certainly for me, it's often through the fiction. So I will go back and reread some of the stories that I wrote from my 20s, like Strange Playgrounds. And look, I mean, I sincerely don't remember knowing that this is what I was doing. So it was unconscious, whatever was working its way out unconsciously.
Yeah.
But reading them now and thinking about who I was at the time and what I was experiencing at the time, it's like, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that actually you think, well, how did I not know?
Yeah.
But you don't.
No, that's it. And I think, your relationship to your own art evolves, your relationship to other people's art evolves as you do. I mean, it's where we started the conversation. You're not the same person you were 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The My Life in Horror project is an act of excavation. It's an act of archaeology, really.
Definitely. As I'm learning.
It's you're discovering for yourself now. Enjoy.
Wow. This is going to be very interesting.
Yeah. But part of the fun, as I say, are those moments where you don't even realize, what you're writing about. And that was years later. Or another example, and this one is weird, is we were talking earlier about memory and self-mythologizing. I'll never fully understand now the circumstances behind the Gremlins article. So the story of the Gremlins article is that Jim came to me and said, we're doing Joe Dante week. You said you were going to do a piece on Gremlins at some point. Can you do it as a rush job? Because then we can publish it as part of Joe Dante week. Now, my memory is that I did it at work. My memory is that this email, and I did it on a lunch break, and it was the fastest I'd ever written anything. And I did it I didn't do it in an hour. I did it in 90 minutes. But I stretched my lunch break and I got it done. Yeah. And it is a tight 2,000 words. That much is true. I was definitely working on a quick deadline. That much is true. So that was the version of events I had in my head. I definitely wrote one at work. I did it. But then when I came back to edit that essay, that was for volume 1. I talk about drinking whiskey while I'm writing it.
Interesting.
Now, there's no way I was drinking whiskey at work. I just want to be clear about that, because I was in office at the time. Not I drink whiskey at work now, even though I'm at home. But it was physically impossible. So either at some point I told the story of writing it on the lunch break and I started believing it, or I wrote a different essay on my lunch. That definitely happened. I definitely wrote a My Life in Horror in 90 minutes. But maybe it wasn't Gremlins.
Maybe it was
a completely different one, and I just transposed it because I remember Gremlins as a rush job.
Oh God, that always gets me about memory. When you have this very certain memory of something that happened, and something comes along that demonstrates that it was wrong.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's such a job on your psyche, isn't it? On your sense of self. It's amazing.
Well, it's nice for me because it's a worked example, and it kind of forces me into a bit of humility, right, with the whole project. Because it's like, well, look, dude, because for years I told people, because the Gremlins article became a kind of, because it went viral, it was the first one of My Life in Horror that went viral, and it really went nuts because they shared it on the Gremlins Facebook page.
Oh, brilliant.
This was before that they kiboshed the algorithm, so if you liked a page, you saw everything on there, right? So everyone who liked Gremlins saw it, and literally hundreds of thousands of people read that fucking article, and it was great, it was really nice. It's lovely. It was really sweet, but because of that, I ended up talking about that particular article a lot because of the buzz, because of the thing. would ask me about it, and Jim would bring it up, obviously, because he was really rightly incredibly proud of what had happened with that, and really pleased about it. So at some point, the story of me writing it on my lunch break became a thing, and it was a rush job. That much is true.
Yeah,
it must. I know it was, because Jim's. Jim remembers that it was a rush job. He remembers coming to me and saying that. But like, yeah, when I actually wrote that, I must have written it I think I wrote it in an evening. I think I did something else on a lunch break, and then I just transposed it.
Do you ever have? I mean,
it's just so strange.
I'm sure you must have had this experience, but have you ever written like a story in like in a really reactionary state of mind, like you were if you were angry about something?
Yeah.
Or in response to something, because that's an amazing feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the next long form piece I want to write is like that. I mean, the one that I think I've had one go at it already in short form, and I've got another short story I want to write that's kind of picking around the edges of the same scab before I get on with the big one. It's like The House That Ate Fascists was definitely that, which hasn't been published yet, but I read it at I read it at Chillicon. I was on a double header with Duncan Bradshaw. I wrote an amazing story about wrestling, which was doesn't sound like a horror story, but it was amazing, just wonderful. We did a double bill, and I read the House That Ate Fascists.
It's a great title, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. It's not to give away the ending, but But that's the mood I was in. I mean, the title tells you the mood I was in when I wrote it. I mean, the title came first, and it was just like, well, no, it's interesting. It's one of those things where I had an idea for ages of wanting to write a haunted house story from the point of view of the house. Like, and then like, what's the voice of a house? What does a house even sound like? How do houses talk?
That's really interesting, because I don't think I've ever come across a horror story that's done that.
I feel like it must have been done, but it
must have been done somewhere, but I can't say I've ever come across it.
So anyway, that was the idea initially, but that floated around. But you see, that's what it's like with writing. You get these things that they're ideas, but they're not narratives.
That's right. You can't. That's right. They work great as images or as like concepts, but you just can't. You can't get anything out of them, right?
Yeah, and that one was floating around for a while, and then there was a call for an anti-fascist splatterpunk anthology, and I thought, I'm having a go at that.
Yeah, let's do it, right?
And that was where it came from, and then it was like, because that was then the focus. It was suddenly the haunted house bubbled back up again, and I thought, The House That Ate Fascists. I thought, yeah, I love that.
Brilliant. I kind of remember a similar thing. This was a story that was in Strange Playgrounds called The State of Lovers.
Right.
And initially that came out of like this, it's so incredibly gay, but these partially drunken conversations I would have with a friend of mine where we would talk about like, so what parts of like public figures would you put into your perfect man? So what would they have? Whose hair would they have? Like what? And I thought that would be like a really fun, slightly silly horror story to tell, where it's like a take on Frankenstein, where you actually have someone doing that. It's sort of like doing a slightly Reanimator thing, Victor Frankenstein thing, where they're gathering parts for their perfect boyfriend. Didn't work. Yeah. It's just not me. That style of writing is just not me. So I scrapped the entire thing and went back to the drawing board. And what came out when I started being sincere about it and started feeling it was this story that asked questions about perfection. So why are you looking for perfection in your partner? And what does that say about you? Yeah. And that's where the story that got published is The State of Lovers. That's one I'm really proud of, actually, because it's horny as hell. It's really erotic. It's from the perspective of a straight woman as well, which is really interesting to play with. You know?
That's really interesting. You made me think of, there's a short story in, I think it's Fabulous Beasts, right? Priya Sharma, about.
Oh my God!
The one about the hands.
She is.
Yeah.
Guys, just for a brief interlude, guys, if you haven't read,
go read Priya, man.
Priya Sharma.
Yeah.
All the Fabulous Beasts, you've got to read it. I'm going to put a link in the bottom of this video. It is one of the best short story collections that I have ever read. Honestly, it's mind-blowingly good.
Yeah, no, she's absolutely. It's funny. One of the projects I did sort of keep turning over on while I was, over the break was the podcast versions of Writeopolis. We're slowly but surely. I'm turning the original, because we do them as a rough release MP3 on the Patreon, but I'm just adding on like the introduction music and the closer. But what it means is I'm listening to quite a lot of them, revisiting them, and I've just finished season 1. But we got Priya on fire. Early in season, and that'll be coming out. I think that's either out or it's coming out in the next week or 2.
Brilliant.
It's on the YouTube channel or podcast catch. Just look up Writeopolis on podcast catchers. They're all there now. They're coming out slowly but surely. But she's just an incredible talent.
There were I always think of them as a triumvirate, almost like it's almost Catholic in a way. It's like the triune mothers. You've got Georgina Bruce, you've got Laura Marrow, and you've got Priya Sharma.
And it was those 3 collections, wasn't it? It was Sing Your Sadness Deep, House of Wounds, and All the Fabulous Beasts. And they're just
those 3, honestly. I mean, they've heard me talk about most of these before, to be honest. We've had Laura on many times. Those 3 are amazing. If you want an example of what's happening in like small press horror, and how like transgressive and interesting it is, and the voices that are in it now, get those collections. They are.
And by the way, sheer quality, I have to say. Quality of writing, quality of production, the whole goddamn thing. They are just exquisite. Really, really exquisite.
It's a case of we'll buy anything they do, and we'll
absolutely.
And have done. Done.
But there's a story in there that Priya did about a guy who's obsessed with the perfect hands. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
And it's just fun. And I love that one because it's so gentle. And the thing I really love, not to give it away, but it's a horror story, so it's not going to end well. But what I love about that one is I was almost convinced, sort of 2 pages from the end, that it was going to have a happy ending. I'd almost convinced myself, because there was a way through. There was a way the narrative could turn. The way she turned it, the way she played with your kind of expectation, and then just... I mean, she really brings the hammer down on the last page on that story. That is brutal.
It does have this guillotine quality to
it.
And she does it deliberately. I mean, as a writer,
I was lost in admiration, because actually, let's talk about it. It's a good example to talk about, because one of the things that I find interesting about horror, and I've been thinking about this a lot, so going back to the thing about how you're putting yourself through something physiological that your body is convinced is real, but your mind knows isn't, and how that's kind of a safe thing. But don't you find as well that you have a dual consciousness when you're reading or watching horror, where part of you has that visceral reaction, and then there's another part of you that's like applauding the person that came up with the horrible thing, that, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's the joy of being manipulated, isn't it? It's the joy of being in someone's hands, of them toying with your imagination and your emotions and manipulating you in a very sincere way. And there is almost like Barker would love this, I'm sure, and I'm sure he said it before, but there is almost like a submissive sexual thing going on here, right?
Definitely.
It almost fulfills the same requirements or pulls at the same strings. It's this notion that you are out of control. You are in someone else's control. They are toying with your emotions in a very intimate and intense way, but there's no consequence to it. You're not going to be harmed by it.
That's right. Yeah, and I guess, and that, I mean, look, and that applies to horror and horror fantasy, and I guess that also probably applies to a lot of erotica as well, right? I mean, actually,
I mean, in fact, I think like erotica and horror are probably the closest there. They're almost like a hybrid in many respects, because it's a similar level of visceral arousal, isn't it? And often they go together. Like, it's the old saw, isn't it? Why do people go to horror films? It's so they can get off with their partner, right?
Absolutely.
It's that sort of Thanatos Eros thing going on again.
Well, and I mean, Chuck Tingle talked about it when I interviewed him about his horror novella Stray. He said horror, comedy, erotica are actually 3 sides of the same coin. They all have, it's all set up and payoff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like,
it's tension and release of tension. Like
was it Sam Raimi who talked about this? It may have been Sam
Yeah,
Raimi, where he said basically the only difference between a horror scene and a comedy sketch is really context.
Yeah,
They often
yeah.
have the same beats. You know, they often they work in very similar ways. They have very similar rhythms. The only difference is at the end of one you get a scream and at the other you get a laugh, right?
Yeah.
And often both at the same time. I mean, a lot of horror, when there is that scare, you have the laugh after, don't you?
I mean, and this is the guy who made Evil Dead 2, which
Yeah.
makes you scream with laughter. I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, I mean, the point in that where the guy's chainsawing off his own hand and yelling, "Who's laughing now?" And it's
Who's laughing
and it's
now?
just simultaneously, like, teeth grittingly repulsed and almost like helpless with laughter. It's
an
quite
amazing
extraordinary.
balance. Very hard to pull off. It can go really south really quickly, but when they do it well, there are not many I can think of that hit that beat so well. The other one I think of always is Dog Soldiers.
Right, I've not seen that, but
honestly, Neil Marshall's Dog Soldiers.
Yeah.
Not I've mentioned this before, but I'm a hard sell on werewolves. You know that.
Yeah.
They have to.
I think we talked about it, right? Actually, cinema is just really hard to do them well. Like, they don't tend to work very well on screen.
This is a horror comedy, but the comedy is very gallows and the situation is very real. And it has some of the best werewolves in cinematic horror. They are utterly brilliant. It's genuinely scary and tense and gory, but also really fucking funny. Like, laugh out loud funny. And you're often laughing at stuff that you know you shouldn't be laughing at.
But I think there's something too about the adrenaline hit, even when they're not playing it for laughs, that kind of create. The one I was, because it's interesting when we were talking about, when I was first, expositing this kind of thing, this phenomenon, there were two things I was thinking about. And the first one was actually both of which I think you and I have watched together on commentaries. The first one was Julia coming out the mattress in Hellraiser 2.
Yeah, of course.
And there's two things there. There's the moment where Chenard hands the straight razor to the man who's hallucinating maggots under his skin, right? Yes. And he just starts hacking away at his own flesh. Genuinely, that is one of the most viscerally disturbing things I can remember seeing in a film. Like, it's just because there's so many layers to it. There's the psychological cruelty of that, right? The enormous cruelty of what Chenard is doing, like the not just ignoring but shattering the Hippocratic Oath, like doing the opposite, like first doing harm.
Causing harm, actively causing harm
from a position of power and authority and trust. And then there's just the visceral, because the effect is really fucking good. So there's the visceral shot of this kind of straight razor cutting through flesh, and just the horror of that. And then there's this kind of next level supernatural thing where the skinless wonder bursts out.
That's the other thing, isn't it? It takes it even further. So even in of itself, as a conception, if that was just the scene where you've got an abusive psychiatrist who's like indulging this man's delusions and causing him to harm himself through them, that's bad enough. And it goes, and then in classic sort of Clive Barkerian fashion, it leaps into the stratosphere, doesn't it? It just goes like, no, we're also going to introduce this inverse birth stuff, which is horrific and unnatural and vile and almost like viscerally evil in a way that you can't even express properly.
and then it layers it even further, because then you have the moment where the guy who is being horribly murdered by this skinless whatever is reaching for the curtain behind which is standing our audience identification figure, the only reason we're seeing the scene in the first place.
Right.
And then suddenly it's a whole other level of like, oh shit, I'm going to be seeing this. And then that's fucking, that's
the other thing, isn't it?
It's like Blackbeard's wives, isn't it?
Yeah,
and the locked door. That's
and being caught as a voyeur as well. I mean, there's that too, because you're seeing something really horribly intimate, and it's and you are right. There is this there's almost like this separation, and it's almost Freudian, isn't it? It's almost like it's like the superego watching the id, almost. The id is going, whoa, and it's feeling all of these visceral emotions, and the superego is up here watching and going, yes, isn't that well done? Well done.
I don't know about that. I think my superego is cackling like a loon and slapping
as
hands
well,
together
yeah.
and saying, "Fucking yes,
Yeah.
amazing."
No, I think you are right though. Like there is like there is almost like a there you it's almost like you appreciate this experience on multiple levels. Yeah.
And I think at least part of it, part of the same thrill, and I don't intend this to sound demeaning because it's not, because I'd love them as well, but actually it's the same thrill as the roller coaster. It's the illusion of danger, it's the adrenaline hit. I mean, the other scene that I was thinking about as we were talking there, which is the classic, is the chest biter from The Thing. It's the moment where he goes to put the electric paddles and the guy's chest just splits open, his ribcage becomes ragged teeth, and he just bites the doctor's hands off. And the thing about that moment for me, I mean, I saw that film way too young, admittedly, but I think part of the reason that resonates so powerfully with me is that was exactly the kind of nightmare image I would have as a kid.
Yes.
Because there's something very childlike about that. It's just because it's completely fucking impossible. That's the thing.
It's
totally
absurdist,
impossible.
isn't it?
Yeah,
it's absurdist. And the absurdity of it evokes simultaneously both horror and comedy and sort of humor.
Yeah, because it's just completely. But I think, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because we could go off on a tangent here. But like for me, I've always struggled with surrealism. Actually, I've always found surrealism actually kind of creepy, kind of disturbing. I don't do well with caricature. Caricatures kind of give me the willies a bit. You know, Spitting Image used to kind of scare me. I didn't really like it. I got that it was trying to be funny. I got it was meant to be funny, but I never really liked it.
There's an uncanniness, isn't there?
I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated by the puppets, especially. I had books. I had Spitting Image books with photographs and all that kind of, like, I was fascinated by the puppets, but it was a kind of repulsed fascination. I didn't like them. My reason for being fascinated by them was because they made me feel icky.
It's the same thing that people often have with clowns, isn't it? The sort of coulrophobia thing, where it's exaggerated features of any kind.
Yeah, I think there's something about that distortion. I think there's something about that, you know, that really kind of got under my skin. And it is that thing about surrealism. I always found, you know, like, I fucking love Python when it's good. Yeah. But I always find Python put me a bit on edge.
Yes, those cartoons are distressing.
Quite sure what's going to happen, and
there is a disturbia inherent, which I think is part of the comedy. Actually, like surrealist comedy works on that edge. You've seen Jam, right?
No, I haven't seen Jam.
Really?
No, I haven't seen it. I know.
Honestly,
I'm a little nervous to Jam because I love Morris so much. And I love Brasso so much. But I remember reading about Jam and being like, I don't know, man.
Is, for me, for my taste, Jam is apex. Jam is like the high watermark of British comedy. But it is the kind of thing where some people will watch it and say, why is it called a comedy?
Yeah.
Because this is horrific. This is so disturbing.
Well, the Python Boys did it. I mean, their last movie, The Meaning of Life, where they did all the shit that they couldn't get away with for the TV show, because I think they kind of knew it was going to be their last one as well. I think they the dynamic was already falling apart by that point. But that fucking movie, man, people forget about. Everyone remembers the Universe song. People forget the context of the Universe song. It's the fucking organ donor sketch.
Yes,
where you fill out your organ donor card, so the doctors knock your door down in the middle of the night, throw you across your kitchen table, and remove the organs that you've given up for donor. It's like this is fucking Brazil levels of horror.
Oh yeah, I mean the song itself is kind of like an existential horror, right? It's just it's explaining to you that you are cosmically insignificant. It's
nihilistic as fuck, that song.
Yeah,
it's actually a totally nihilistic kind of like. You are a tiny speck in it. It's fucking Lovecraftian.
Yeah, exactly.
You are a tiny speck in an ocean, an unfathomable ocean of darkness and coldness that goes on forever.
I mean, there you have encapsulated exactly what we're talking about. The same principle expressed in comedy and in, like, you know, what many people consider to be one of the
linchpins, right?
The linchpins of horror. Exactly. But the same principle ultimately.
Yeah.
And the same concerns, right? The same fundamental human concerns. That's another thing. You know, when people do ask, well, why horror? What horror allows us to do is to peer into that abyss. Yeah. It allows us to teeter on the edge without destroying ourselves. You know, to do it in real life, you need to experience trauma. You need to experience something awful, right? You need to be on the edge of things like breakups or death or disease or something morbid. Horror allows you to do that. It allows you to tap dance on the edge of the abyss. And you know, for all of us, really, it is part of what we are, whether we want to admit it or not. It's there.
I mean, we're all doing it, whether we acknowledge it or not, actually, right?
Of course. Very often with the fiction we consume or with the art we consume, rather than acknowledging it, we're throwing up distractions or diversions, or we're trying to mask it, right?
Yeah.
That's what a lot of like prescribed fiction, like media, is about. I mean, soap operas and what, they're all about that. That's what they are, right? It's what they're for. It's like throwing banality. It's dulling the mind with banality. It's like a kind of anesthetic, and it blinds you to the abyss that we're all teetering on the edge of all the time from the moment our first cells coalesce. I think what horror writers and people who enjoy horrific art and whatnot have is this propensity to look down, and to just say, oh, look at that, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and I think too, there is an interesting thing. I mean, what I find the thing I am fascinated by is that kind of that dual impulse, or the dual reaction that happens at once, the simultaneous kind of repulsion and joy or fascination, whatever you want to call it. And I mean, I always think The Thing is such a good example for that, because the effects work in it is so extraordinary. And The Thing for me gives the lie to the idea that jump scares are always bad as well. I mean, I think there's a couple of jump scares in The Thing that I think they're fucking works of art. You can put them next to Picasso. They're just
there is that thing, isn't there, that's
transcendently brilliant.
It has grown up quite recently, really, certainly in critical circles, that jump scares are inherently bad, and that's not the case. Jump scares can be amazing. They can be incredibly well done. Absolutely. I mean, there's that one. For me, I always go back to that one in The Exorcist 3, Legion. With the nurse. It's exquisite. I mean, as an artifact, as an example of how you do the jump scare well.
I mean, for me, it's the murder of Halloran in The Shining.
It's very good.
It knocks me out of my skin every single time, and I know it's coming at this point. It's not about that, but the way it is, pun intended, I guess, executed, it's just flawless. And again, the same with The Thing. The moment with the hands, or the moment where the dog's muzzle splits open. It's like, and it is like the reaction. I am simultaneously, every time I see it, I have equal parts of me going, ah, and going, wow, and it's that kid fascination of, like, the kid thing of, like, when you, like, you come across a snail that's already been run over, right, or trodden on, and you feel bad and you feel repulsed, but you're also kind of fascinated, right? You can't look away, and it's a similar kind of thing. And I think it's interesting to me. I think about that more with movies than I do with books, because I think movies have those more kind of impactful moments. But like, my love of, like, the effects, like a good effect shot, I mean, I was thinking about, like, I know, like, Freddy versus Jason is not a good movie, but I love it. And I love it. A big part of why I love it is because there's some really imaginative effects work. Funny enough, especially in the Jason kills in that movie, they really go for it with the Jason kills, and they look fucking good, man. They're really unpleasant and really, like, impressive, just physical effects. And you're like,
there's that too, isn't there? There's the fact that you get to see things that you can't possibly see in real life, because
crucially, you don't want to see in real life. That's the point. That is the point. And that's what I think people miss. Why do you want to see this shit in a movie? It's like, because I don't want to see it in the real world.
Exactly. Confined to fiction, but to fiction, it can be beautiful.
Fiction,
it actually can.
I think fiction is the ultimate safe space. And again, I think the phrase safe space is one that's completely understood. It doesn't mean you don't experience shit when you're in there. You absolutely do. The safety is the book is in your hands and you can put it down whenever you want. The movie is in your hands. You can press pause or stop or eject whenever you want. You can walk away. You can. That's what makes it a safe space. It's not that the experience itself is quote unquote safe. That would be. I don't want that. That would be
pointless, wouldn't it? That would make it banal and.
It's safe in the sense of, unlike in real life, you have control.
Yes, that's it, isn't it? It comes down to, like,
where you submit, you are submitting voluntarily, and you're doing it knowing what the bill of sale is, or
That's it.
choosing not to know what the bill of sale is, but knowing you're in for some shit, right? But either way.
Exactly that. It comes down to the lack of imposition,
Yeah.
right? It's not a violation because someone else is not doing it to you against your will, right?
And that's where I have to say where I find some of the kind of younger left commentary right now around art and fiction a little bit baffling.
It's quite troubling at times.
Because they just haven't really got their heads around that. And I get it. I get where they're coming from and the impulses, a lot of the impulses behind where they're coming from in terms of like this, because there's a wider argument about how, I mean, again, everything we've already talked about, how white and patriarchal and so forth our culture is. Yeah. And obviously, you know, pop culture in all of its forms helps perpetuate that by the portrayals of men and women and people of color and all of that stuff. And that it is really important that we be better at that as artists.
Yeah, totally.
You know, and I think, you know, to go back to King, who's I've mentioned as a kind of Mount Rushmore figure for me, there are flaws in his writing on this stuff that he himself has acknowledged that he's tried to get better at. But even recently that he's done, I mean, I don't know if anyone else out there's read Elevation. If you haven't, please don't. It's terrible.
Is it?
Oh, God, it's awful.
Is it?
Makes it so terrible is he's really trying, and it's just like, I mean, he's committed. Look, here's what I'll say about Elevation. I think Elevation really does show you the limits of where well-meaning white liberalism gets you.
Oh,
like,
wow, that's I want to read it. I want to read it now.
Fucking bad.
Is it?
But you know what? But you know what I will say about that? It is fucking bad, but I do still, and this may sound straight, but I applaud him for trying, because even in the act of producing bad art, I think he's actually shone a light on like a problem, like a thing. It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
That's you know, the SJW types do kind of have a point. Because you were trying really hard and you really fucked this up.
Oh, that's fascinating. That is fascinating. I want to read that now.
He's trying so fucking hard to find a way. And I think what he's trying, actually he's trying to talk about allyship. I think he's really honestly trying to put himself, he's trying to figure out how do you be an ally and what's a good allegory. Like, and the allegory he hits on is interesting, but it just, holy shit,
it just doesn't work, right? Oh, bless.
But even then, you know, like, you get something valuable out of it, I think. Like, I'm genuinely glad he wrote it. I'd probably not ever read it again.
I suppose what it does in that regard then is it does demonstrate like the difficulties that like people have, right, in being an ally, which is a conversation that's worth having, right? Well,
and that's the thing I really appreciated about the Tingle book, because the story in the novella Straight is that there's this cosmic event that happens once a year, and it drives all the straight people crazy. They go on like rampaging killing sprees, and it only affects straight people.
Oh, interesting. That's fascinating.
So you have all kind, but the genius of I mean, that's a great idea, but I think what really elevated the story to the next level is the book doesn't take part on year 1; it takes part on year 3.
Right.
And that's really clever narrative decision, because what it means is, because you can picture what the year 1 book would look like, and it would be like a Ramiro movie or whatever, and like that's a cool story, but Chuck's got other fish to fry. He wants to say, okay, what happens once we know about it?
Yes, what's the politics, right?
Because by year 3, what you've got is a national lockdown on that day, and you've got, I love this, the gay militia. Literally every single LGBTQ person who's in uniform is drafted that day. They have to be on duty because they're the only ones that can be trusted.
Awesome.
Because the straight people are crazy. There's a vaccine, but we don't know how many people have taken it and how many people haven't. And it's just like, fucking hell, man.
Yeah, that's good.
That's the good stuff.
It's good stuff. That is
good stuff, you know, like really digging into it. And it's great, you know, because, I mean, the reason I bring it up is because he's got, well, 2 things. One is like the lead character's bisexual, and he's got this real anxiety about, is he bisexual enough? Which is what we were talking about earlier.
Cool, yeah.
But it is a real, that is a real experience. And that's something that you hear bisexual people talk about quite a lot, actually.
It is a real thing. It's a real issue. Like issues with biphobia in gay couples, right? That exists. That's a thing.
I think especially for bi people who happen to be in heteronormative relationships, I think for them it's really like, there is a visibility issue, and there is an identity issue. There's an anxiety attached to that, which I completely understand.
Absolutely, because there is this, like, from both sides, right? From straight people and gay people, they get this notion that they are not bi because they're in this relationship. So if they're in a same-sex relationship, then you're gay, and if you're in a heteronormative relationship, then you are straight. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
But one of the things, and I don't want to give it away because narratively it's really important, but straight has some shit to say about allies and quote unquote allies. Yeah. And it's pretty tough. It's pretty uncompromising. And I interviewed him for Ginger Nuts, and I actually asked him directly about that, which was really good. And his answer was very thoughtful and very kind of interesting. And I'll leave it for the reader to explore it for themselves. But I just found that fascinating, because to me it's like that. Yeah, there's something about, like, I'm quite committed to the idea that writing done well is an act of radical empathy.
Yep.
And I'm inherently suspicious of any notion that my white male straightness prevents me from being able to understand any point of view that isn't white male and straight. Like, I kind of reject that on a visceral level, because
because you're an imaginer, right? Because you're a writer. Because it's what you are, right?
And also I'm an empathic human being that lives in the fucking world. Like, I understand that I will have blind spots. I understand that I'll have unconscious biases. I understand that, Christ, we haven't even got into this, but like, one of the things, the people that scare me more than anybody else are the people who say things like, well, advertising doesn't work on me, or well, I know my own mind.
No.
Those are the ones that scare the shit out of me, because it's like, you are the most open to manipulation.
Absolutely.
You are the most likely to be led by prejudice.
Yeah, because you fundamentally misunderstand what you're talking about, right?
Well, that's Dawkins' disease right there, right? There's a guy who's got 10,000 hours in evolutionary biology, and that makes him an expert on that, but he thinks it makes him an expert on fucking everything.
It's almost like the Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where we lack the ability to understand when we are not able to comprehend something.
Yeah.
So we assume often, especially if we're operating in an area where we've had some kudos or plaudits, that we have comprehension of everything, or that we can do everything. You see it in celebrity culture all the time. Obviously, you get celebrities who are, famous for doing one thing and then start doing another. Actors who become directors, and directors who become writers, and so on and so forth. And it often doesn't work.
Yeah, no, that's right. But I think for me, it's like so like I do absolutely reject the notion that, for example, that I couldn't write gay characters, or I couldn't write a character of color or whatever. Like, I'm just not.
Yeah.
And there is a school of thought that says I shouldn't do that. There's a school of thought that says to stay in my lane, and I'm going to very respectfully disagree with that. I'm going to go where my muse takes me. I'm going to write about the things I'm going to write about. And I think, actually, interestingly, in the community, we have seen some examples where that kind of gatekeeping has been incredibly harmful, ironically, to marginalized people. I mean, I don't know if you remember the big hoo-ha about the story that was published by Clarksville 2 or 3 years ago called "I Identify as an Attack Helicopter."
Yeah, I remember very well.
Now that's an example where, and for people who don't know, so the story was written. Now, the attack helicopter meme, you may or may not be aware of. This is something that was being used by anti-trans bigots quite a lot. It was being thrown about. This is about people choosing their pronouns and that kind of thing. And it's because, obviously, the right find it hilarious that people can choose their own pronouns because they're against choice. Because they are fundamentally
and also fundamentally
fascist.
Misunderstand language. That's the other thing.
There's that, and also they think that everyone should conform to rigid stereotypes, and if they don't, they want to beat you to a bloody pulp because they're fascists. So that's their mindset, of course. So it was a right-wing meme joke. I identify as attack helicopter. That was this joke that went around, and this incredible trans person got hold of that and wrote a science fiction story called I Identify as Attack Helicopter that was absolutely about science fiction and about transness and about identity and then the community lost its fucking mind.
It lost its mind, yeah. They were pilloried, largely pilloried, driven from the internet, right?
That person no longer writes. I mean, they've completely given up on writing, and they wrote a story that was, it might have even been Hugo nominated. I mean, it was just an incredible piece of writing, an incredible kind of, and I don't know if it was a debut, but it was certainly, they were a young writer. It was an early piece of work, incredible promise. and collectively the community absolutely fucked that one. I'm sorry,
totally.
but we did. We really fucked that one up. And I just, so for me, I think there's a really important thing about, and again, it gets complicated because there's this whole movement about own voices at the moment. And then there was a thing about like policing the edges of that is really problematic. And it is really problematic. And
it is difficult. Yeah, it's absolutely difficult.
That was a test case on why policing the edges are bad. That doesn't mean own voices is bad. Own voices is really fucking important. We need gay narratives written by gay people. We need people of color narratives written by people of color. But we also need to stop thinking about them as gay narratives and as people of color narratives. They are narratives featuring, starring people of color, starring gay people. They're not like, what is a gay story? Anyway, what does that even fucking mean? Like, what are we talking about when we say that? It doesn't make any sense when you say it out loud. What? No, it's
no. You are right. I mean, there was, we got it. Last year when we published the first book of Queer Saints. We got it because of the term queer, which is a reclaimed word. It was originally a slur, but it's a reclaimed word. It's been a reclaimed word for a long time, and it's ours now. Yeah, it belongs to us. I mean, I love queer, actually. I use that in description of myself. I think it's brilliant because it not only encapsulates everything, you don't need to use the alphabet. It's not the LGBTQ thing. You can, it's everybody, it's everything. It's wonderful in that regard. But it's also the other implications of the word, which is weird. It's transgressive. It's unusual. I love that. I love that very much. But we did get some pushback over that, and we often do. And also for the content of it as well. I mean, it's an awful thing to say. I think we may have discussed it before, actually, but there is this kind of strange new Puritanism arising.
No, there is.
From within communities, which is really fascinating. This is coming from, I mean, I hesitate to say it, but we call them tender queers, which is like, they are those who perhaps benefited from a degree of inclusiveness.
Sure.
Which hasn't existed before.
Sure.
And so maybe don't necessarily understand the problematics of gay representation, gay particularly, it seems. And the fact that, and there seems to be this argument from them that we can't, that every gay or every LGBTQ character in general, every queer character has to be pure as the driven snow.
Right. Or
somehow we are inviting our own victimization or our own marginalization,
or perpetuating stereotypes, or evidencing, internalized homophobia, right? I mean, you can see that argument, and that could apply. I mean, I say that because we're talking in this context about gay people. Obviously, you can extrapolate that to any group that you care to name.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well,
that's what the Book of Queer Saints was about. It was in reaction to that very rising, that rising phenomena. It's called the Book of Queer Saints, ironically, because every story involves very dark, ambiguous LGBTQ characters of various stripe, and every single one of them also deals with some of the darker, more ambiguous aspects of what we are.
Yeah.
I mean, mine, The Last Disgrace was a really odd one because it was about the experience of being both a young gay man operating in like prescribed queer spaces like gay bars and whatnot, and also being the older gay man operating in those spaces, because I'm increasingly edging towards the latter of that now, and it's about like the slight predatoriness that comes from the latter at times, and the almost like fanatic nihilism that comes of the previous very often. It was really fascinating to write, but these are ambiguities and difficulties that are part and parcel of the identity. It's what we are, and it's our experience. And God damn it, we can write what we fucking like. We can write about that. We can express that, right? And there's almost like a get off my lawn quality as well. There's like we've done, this is our experience. We had, you do have this almost like this reaction to the younger like queer people saying, "Yo, you can't do that," where it's like, I can fucking do what I like.
Yes, I fucking can. Yeah.
I fucking can. I've done it.
And by the way, like, look, to be clear, just to be crystal clear, and you don't have to like it, and you don't have to read it, and that's fine too, right? I mean, one of the things that I find so infuriating about this whole situation is you seem to end up with this situation where people are in one or two camps, right? You've either got I'm gonna use these terms loosely, but you've got utopianism, and then you've got scab picking, right?
Yeah.
I first heard that phrase used by Elizabeth Standerford. I think she nicked it from someone else, but I can't remember who. But anyway, these are the two. She was talking about this in terms of trans literature and trans science fiction and horror, but I think it applies equally well to whatever historically marginalized community you're talking about here, right? And the thing is, for me, what I don't understand is why anyone would feel like you have to fucking pick one, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, write as much utopia. I mean, there was this huge thing when Heartbreaker came out, right? This huge thing about like, oh man, this is. I mean, loads of people loved it, but there was this real reactionary wave against it from some people saying, oh, that's not true to form. Where's the homophobia? Where's the this? Where's the that? It's not really real and all this kind of shit. And I'm like, you know what? It's fine.
Yeah, it's
fine that this group decided that they wanted a utopian romance.
Yeah, right. Because it's not
fine.
It's not talking about that, is it? If that's not what the writers didn't want to talk about, then that's up to them.
Yeah. And like, so great. And it doesn't mean you can't write your scab picking horror story about
absolutely
shit that went down, right? Like,
it works both ways.
The problem is when members of one camp start wagging their finger at the other and saying you shouldn't do that. That's when it gets. And I just find it faintly fucking ridiculous.
Yes, absolutely. You
honestly,
write what you like, right? You don't. It's not
read what you like. Life is fucking short, kids. It's really, really short.
It's not up to other people. That if there is one area where you have absolute authority and you do whatever you like, it's in your own imagination.
That's right.
That's absolutely true.
And now, you know, and the artists you choose to invite in and share that with, right? The ones who you choose to touch imaginations with. That's a choice that you make.
Yep. It certainly is.
You know?
Certainly is. And also, I mean, there's truth in both. There's something expressed in whatever comes out, you know.
Yeah, 100%.
It's not like one has primacy over the other.
Yeah. And and I don't think it says anything about you morally as a person about which one you're drawn to either.
No. Not at all.
You know, it doesn't tell me anything about you as a human being that you're drawn to utopian or you're drawn to scab picking. It tells me nothing.
Absolutely.
Beyond you're drawn to one of those two things, right? The only thing it tells me is if you're drawn to scab picking, we're more likely to have a good conversation about books we've read. Yeah, that's the stuff I like. That's all it tells me. It doesn't tell me anything else about you, and it's fine. It's fine either way.
Yeah, and
don't get why we have to turn it. Why are we being the police to each other?
Yes, and what
a good thing.
I think it's particularly bad when it comes from queer circles, to be honest, because the standards that they are often applying to us are straight prescribed. They are from heteronormative culture. You know, they are with regards to the boxes and the pigeonholes that the wider culture wants us to fit into to make us safe, to make us toothless, right?
I remember you telling me about this when like gay marriage first became a thing. I remember you telling me there was a really intense debate within the queer community about like, do we actually want this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like genuine kind of real quite
I'll be
heated
honest,
arguments.
It's still ambiguous for a lot of us. It's still like, because it is when we first of all, there's the whole notion of being gifted the right.
Well, right.
That's a problem. For me, that's a problem. It's like, fuck you. Yeah. My immediate reaction is kind of rock and roll. You know, it's like, fuck you. Yeah. It's two fingers. Fuck you. With your 70% divorce rates and whatnot, fuck you. Yeah. It's not up to you, you know. It doesn't belong to you. But there's also the notion that what happens with a lot of gay people when they get married, they almost like try to ape straight structures of marriage, and it strikes me as problematic in many ways. It really does. And don't get me wrong, it's not up to me what.
No, right.
It's whatever works for whoever's getting married. I don't give two shits. But it does bother me when it feels insincere. or when it feels like it's not what's genuinely wanted, but it's almost like, oh, look how respectable we are. We're not on Grindr. We're not polyamorous. We're not, we're not like the other queers.
Yeah.
That problem.
I think as soon as you start playing respectability politics, you're losing. I mean, we're back to that whole thing about like we will end up in the same cattle car. Like if that's what you want, if you want that lifestyle because you want that lifestyle, then go with God. Like great, because again, life is fucking short. Like do what makes you happy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I agree. Once it starts to become, I mean, weirdly for me, my version of this that I'm getting to experience all at once. Getting an ADHD diagnosis at 44 is internalized ableism, and is like, because I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine, a union colleague, and as soon as I informed this person about my diagnosis, they turned around and said, "So you're disabled?" Like in legal terminology, and I was just like, I got to tell you, I went through a number of reactions very quickly because no one had ever said that to me before.
Of course, yeah. And it's fascinating, isn't it? But like in like, when you tick on your job like interviews, do you consider yourself to have a disability?
Right.
That is one that will come up, right?
And I have to tell you, I went through a complicated series of emotions quite quickly, and they were not all positive.
Yeah, of course.
Like, it was not a nice moment overall.
The stigma that's really attached.
But also like, I mean, I'm not the brightest person in the world, but I'm not the dumbest either. And like, immediately as the kind of stigma thing kicks in, there's and why is that a stigma exactly? What's your fucking problem? You've always been saying you're okay about this shit and you're fighting for. So why is it suddenly a problem when it's you?
Why is it a problem?
Huh?
Again,
then and that's great because then you're in like a feedback loop where you're beating yourself up, right? Then it's like whatever you do, you're fucking up. So that's really excellent. I've lived there for years. It's great. It's like, okay, let's not do that. Let's not do that.
But it's fascinating, isn't it?
That's why it's powerful because there is something to it.
The tension, and this is the kind of thing that you get to express in horror fiction, right? This is the kind of thing that is the stuff. It's the raw stuff. It's the ambiguity. It's the confusion. It's when we turn in on ourselves. There's a reason why so many of us, as well as being generally quite nice people, we all have issues, right? All of us, all of us have got stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, right.
Bloody hell, have we got stuff? Bloody hell, it's where it comes from.
Yeah, but it was a hell of a moment, and I'm nowhere near to processing it even now. I mean, it's weeks later, and I'm still kind of it's still rattling around in my head, in various ways. And I think again that's where fiction is that safe space. And I think for me, I think about the writers that I really admire, and I think about. I think about King, I think about Barker, Ian Banks is another good example. And Jim Thompson was good at it as well. What I like about, I think all of those writers have in common, they're all very different in the subjects that they explored and stuff, but they manage to somehow be both fairly pitiless, but compassionate.
Yeah, it's an odd thing, isn't it? They have like... all of those writers that you described there, they all write very different styles of fiction. But yes, I see exactly what you're talking about. They have this almost like icy distance from culture and the rest of humanity that allows them to see.
Yeah,
it allows them to see, but at the same time, they are not emotionally divorced.
No, that's it. Yeah, and they neither shy away from the ugliness that we are capable of, nor do they short sell the incredible goodness that we are occasionally also capable of.
Exactly that. It's the simultaneous bemoaning of our evils and celebration of our beauty, right? It's a really cool thing. It's a really beautiful thing that happens so often in horror, right?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot. Obviously, it's really... One of the ways it's a strange era to be writing horror in is that we're living through we're living through a real life apocalypse.
Absolutely,
right now.
Yeah. Living through dystopia, yeah.
And I mean, it's the climate collapse has started to happen now. The climate collapse that you and I were taught in school was going to happen is now happening.
Yep.
And none of the steps that needed to be taken when we were kids to avert the worst of it have been taken.
No, because they told us to do it when we were like 5.
Yeah, but we
That's
didn't
the
go.
reason.
We didn't go to Oxford and we didn't go to MIT,
Exactly.
so we were never going to.
That's it, isn't it? You know, we were 5 years old and we were working class. What the hell were we going to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, there are things that working class people can do. It doesn't look like we're going to do them.
No, it's true.
Not yet. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see.
Yes.
Still time. But it's interesting to me that, you know, so it's a really odd time. It's a really odd time to be writing. And I remember when the pandemic hit, there were a few horror writers who actually kind of wanted to stop writing horror.
Yes.
And they wanted
which
to
I understood completely.
Again, yeah, completely. And they wanted to start writing utopian stuff. And they wanted to start. And there was this whole thing about someone tried to make solar punk a thing. It never quite happened. Or hope punk, which is a phrase I find actually genuinely obnoxious. Because
hope punk doesn't work for me. I like solar punk. I think solar punks are great.
I'll tell you why I find hope punk like deeply, deeply offensive. If you call something hope punk, it means you don't understand punk in the first place. Because punk always contained hope.
But
also as angry as a punk is if you don't on some level also have hope, or at least understanding that things could be better.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, for me it's purely aesthetic. I just don't like that double P. Doesn't
I was really angry. I was like, you don't understand punk, fuck off. Punk is hope, you fucking come on, get with the program.
I'm actually a fan of utopian fiction. I really am, and I think we lack it profoundly.
Weirdly, I actually think it's one of the things that Barker was fucking amazing at. I mean,
he is so. I mean, people don't get this, right? They don't get. He's a utopian horror writer. They just don't get it.
His doorstops are for sure. I mean, Imagica is incredible. I mean, it's about Imagica's about the realization of utopia. Yeah. It's a fucking struggle to get there.
But Weaveworld is too, right?
Yeah, Weaveworld is too. Absolutely.
Weaveworld is totally utopian. I mean, there are aspects of the utopian in the Great and Secret Show in Everville too.
Yep. Yeah, I'd agree with that. More complicated, but they're there.
It's there. The hope, the potential. You get the impression that if he finished it was supposed to be like a quartet, wasn't it? There's supposed to be 4 books of the art, but you get the impression that if he'd finished, it would have been a bit like Imagica, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think as things stand, I mean, Imagica really is his PhD thesis statement in the way that it is for King. I think. Yep. Imagica is for Barker, and it doesn't mean it has to be anyone's favorite. But I think it is. It's kind of the one. I mean, it was interesting because I was looking at Writeopolis this year. We did a last year in review, and we had to pick our 3 favorite books from 2022. And of course, one of mine was Imagica because we reread it, didn't we, for the show we did?
We did.
Last year.
Yeah.
And
geez.
I think that book's always going to be one of my favorite books of the year anytime I read it, because what's better?
I was going to say,
what's better than Imagica?
That's the problem, isn't it, right?
Fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Imagica is deeply utopian.
Yeah,
I mean, it's committedly, seriously utopian.
After the Books of Blood, he becomes a really different guy. He really does. Something changes in Barker. You can see it. You can see it in his fiction.
And then after Imagica, it becomes something else again, right?
Yes, it does.
Magical work gets darker again, right? It gets more cynical, and
it does. He becomes a more sort of small scale as well. Like he narrows his focus a little bit. Yeah, definitely. He almost like goes back to the Books of Blood in a way.
Yeah. But anyway, there is that impulse when you're looking down the barrel at the end of the world to say, what's the point of writing horror? The world is horror, so let's write something else. But for me, I think, and obviously, as the guy who wrote the Finite, I'm obviously going a different way with it.
Yeah, obviously, right?
I think there's 2 things. I think one of them is what we talked about earlier in terms of safe spaces, the act of psychological preparation. I mean, the Finite for me was absolutely about me facing down the worst horror I could imagine from being a parent.
Yes.
And then trying to imagine. So what do you do? What do you do when you're a parent and you've got no good choices? I'm probably going to dodge that bullet, but probably isn't definitely. And it's something that every parent, I think, will have thought about or decided not to think about at some point in their lives, right? It's just because I'm a horror writer and a freak, I actually
you've got to do it right. You can't leave the scab alone. Yeah,
no, exactly. I've got to pick that scab. I've got to pick that scab. And I think for me, the scab that I'm desperate to get to start picking now, it's really starting to drive me nuts with the itching, is what does resistance look like? Yeah, right. And where is the line between resistance and malicious compliance and compromise
Mm-hmm.
and failure to resist.
Yeah. What's the price of failure, right?
Well, no, but also like, what is it? One person's passive resistance slash, malicious compliance is another person's capitulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's all kinds of complicated things there about, which I, should be right about positionality, about privilege.
Well, this brings up something really interesting with regards to the wider question you were asking, which is like, people ask what the consideration is: if things are so horrific in waking life, why create horror in fiction, right? Well, it seems that certainly historically, that's what horror does. Yeah. It's a waking nightmare. It allows, on a wider level, it allows culture to process its own traumas and to find new contexts for coping with them. So, like, one of my favorite periods of certainly American cinematic horror is that massively traumatic period from the late 1960s post-Vietnam right up until the mid 1980s.
Yeah.
Where American culture is dealing with so many upheavals and traumas and assaults upon its myths of itself, and that's what horror is doing. The horror cinema of that era is its own waking nightmare, and I think that's what we're going to be doing. That's going to be our function for a little while.
And he's not actually considered to be a horror director, but I mean, I immediately thought of Oliver Stone when you said that in that context. And although he's not ostensibly a horror director, he's absolutely a scab picker of the highest order.
Absolutely.
And his movies are picking at all of that shit, right? And what I love about Stone is he's doing it from the inside, right? Stone is a true believer in that sense. He believes in American exceptionalism. He joined the fucking army. He signed. He volunteered for Vietnam. He wasn't drafted. He chose to go. He believed in the mission. So his anger is the anger of betrayal, of the person from the inside. Someone who was a believer, and that's where Springsteen's pain comes from. That's why his art's so interesting. It's the perpetually frustrated kind of weird way. Kind of Eminem actually oddly has that in common with him as well. He believes in the American way, and then he's like, but why is it like this?
Wes Craven, right? I mean, like Wes's early work, that's what it's about, right?
I mean, the Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes.
It's a Vietnam film. Last House on the Left is one of the purest Vietnam films I have ever seen.
Yeah.
It's Wes expressing everything that he finds. It's the angriest film I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a film that's as angry as Last House on the Left is.
I mean, I like angry art, and Last House on the Left is legitimately too much for me. Like, it's one of the very few movies that I've seen once and will never see again. Like 100%. I've done it.
I don't think I want to watch it again.
No,
and it's not necessarily because of the imagery, although the imagery is bad. It's the anger. It's the he is such an angry young man. Like, it's because he feels betrayed and lied to by everything around him. I mean, it's an accusation. Last House on the Left is an accusation. It's like, no, this is the truth.
I mean, one of the things I love about Wes Craven movies, and it does go a little bit under remarked, is just how fucking useless and shit his cops always are.
Always.
Like, cops in Wes Craven's movies are they're like the Keystone Cops, but they're not even funny. They're just shit. You know?
It's
I love that.
It's
a thread that runs right through, the Elm Streets. The fucking dad's the sheriff.
Systems
useless. And even in Scream,
they're either impotent or they're malicious in Wes Craven films. It's one or the other. They don't get away with anything. And if there's any justice, it often comes from the youth. It often comes from the kids. And
I love how he never lost that, Wes. Like, I know he made some bad movies. I do know that. Like, I'm not.
Oh God, yeah.
But he made some really fucking good ones too, and he was amazingly consistent on that particular point. I respect that.
I've always respected it. I mean, I think I've gotten a much greater respect for him after watching him being interviewed so much, like, because he knows whereof he speaks. He's a considered and clever individual, and a sincere one as well. He really feels what he's trying to do with his work, even when it doesn't work, even when it fails. And I kind of love that. I will always bat for that kind of sincerity.
Yeah, and I think, to go back to scab picking and that whole thing, like the other thing I was thinking about with the works that I've seen, and again, this isn't actually horror, but one of the one of the things that's impacted on me the most powerfully over the last 4 or 5 years, fucking Disney products of all things, it's been Rogue One and
yeah.
the recent Andor series that's a kind of prequel to Rogue One,
Uh-huh.
because these stories that are set at kind of the worst moment in that storyline of that universe. It's
high fascism, right?
It's the rise of fascism, and it's the action, because the prequels were meant to be about the collapse of the Republic, but they're kind of not, because that only happens right at the very, very end, and they're not really about that at all. They're about Anakin, and I'm sorry, but Anakin's boring. I don't care.
True.
But Rogue One, and especially Andor, are actually about that. They are about what happens when you just feel the fucking walls closing in. What happens when suddenly you can't walk down the street you could walk down the day before? What happens when your prison sentence gets booted up from 6 months to 6 years arbitrarily? Like all of that stuff. And then you get into the prison and you realize actually you're never fucking getting out.
You're never out, because it doesn't matter where you are either, does it? This is a galactic empire, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then, I mean, the fact that prisoners are making like battle droids is just so fucking brilliant. But like, there's all that stuff, and like Rogue One, I remember seeing Rogue One in the cinema and just coming out feeling like I'd been hit over the head by a hammer. Like, that movie really did a number on me, and it's because it's about, for me, it's I mean, again, what you were saying, like Lucas in the original conception, like, Star Wars was inspired by Vietnam.
It was a Vietnam film, right?
And the Empire was the Americans.
Yes, yes, right. This is so obvious too.
Yeah.
This is not as they often have it. This is not some sort of retroactive sort of SJW liberal interpretation. This is overt in the material.
Lucas is on record. Go back to it's all there on the transcripts. You can read it for yourself. He said it. It's fucking.
But also it's in the material. I mean, it's so obvious. You get the same thing with like Warhammer 40,000. Obviously, you get it's this old thing we talked about of like the right and fascists and whatnot adopting the imagery of something they either don't understand or are trying to co-opt as to dilute the satire of it. The whole thing about Warhammer 40,000 is that it was originally conceived as a satire of Thatcherism. That's the whole thing. It's taken
Reaganism, right?
Taken to absolute extremes, right? It's fascism taken to absolute extremes, where you've got like this god emperor who is dead. He's a corpse on a throne. This entire galactic empire is built around this false religion about him being a god, right?
Yeah. And the fact that in 2016 you have the far right casting Donald Trump as the God Emperor just goes to show you that,
who is dead, is a mouldering corpse on a throne.
Just goes to show you, like, fascists are immune to satire because they're too stupid. Simple as that. They're just too stupid to realise they're having the piss taken out of them. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Take the piss out of them, but just understand that they will never get it because they don't have sensitive humour because they're fascists.
Never get it. I mean,
they'll never get it.
But that's like, that goes through all the strata as well, doesn't it? Like, you get the same thing where you get people like on the right having Tyler Durden is there. And you're like, have you ever read the book? Have you not seen the film? It's the most anti-fascist thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it's really it's not saying what you think it's saying.
It really isn't saying what you think it's saying.
And like, it's complicated, Fight Club, and I think it actually does have its issues, but that is not it. Chaps.
That's not
it. you are wrong. Well, I mean, I've seen them using Starship Troopers memes, and it's dude, come on. I
mean, fiction. There's a reason why there are not many right-wing artists. There just is,
Yeah.
Art is antithetical to right-wingism. It just is.
As soon as you start engaging honestly with, as soon as you move beyond like the puppet master stage of like, like moving your characters around a building and a plot to fulfill a whatever. Once you start really trying to get inside the heads of the people you're writing about and portraying them honestly, just it's not about you'll be able to do it perfectly. It really isn't. But it's just like you will find the walls do start to crumble at that point.
Yeah.
Because,
absolutely.
Everyone's got a point of view. Everyone's got a reason. Like, I mean, bad guys never think they're the bad guys. It's a cliche, but it's true. Most people who do terrible things don't consider themselves to be terrible people, and most of us are a mix of good and bad, and most of us, would rather be remembered for the best thing we ever did than the worst thing we ever did. I think that's I think most people would say that, right? And it gets harder and harder. It's like, look, this is what we know about prejudice, right? Prejudice never survives first contact with whoever it's prejudiced about, right?
I mean, we see it all the time, don't we? We see it all the time. It's the Republicans who consistently vote against like civil rights for LGBTQ people. Then they have a lesbian daughter, and suddenly it all changes, right?
Look, and this is why the trans panic is kind of like, although it doesn't feel like it right now because it's really powerful, you know, in this country and in the States.
In this country, it's madness in this country. It's bonkers.
But it is actually a last stand.
Yeah.
Because they've been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. And this is the point where they think the population group is small enough.
That's it. It's the emperor's new clothes, isn't it? I mean, they're picking on the smallest kid in the playground, right? And say, oh, look how tough I am, look how right I am.
But it's also like, the point is, once gay liberation got to a point where it reached a critical mass of enough people feeling confident about being out, once everybody knew someone on their street that was gay, then it starts to crumble, because it's like, well, fucking hell, they're all right.
Yeah, nobody cares, right?
Right, and it's just like, oh, right, so that was all bullshit. And then it's just
generational as well. Let's not forget that. It's totally generational. You look at like the people who are in school now, the kids who are in school now, they don't give a shit. They've got non-binary trans friends all over the place, and they don't give two shits. They don't understand like these, and I'm really sorry, but it is like our parents' generation again.
Yes,
it is. It really is. I tend to harp on about this, but it so is. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about, Grandma? You know, you are insane. This doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. No, that's it. And it's just, it's that thing of like, I mean, that amazing chart, you'll have seen it, right? People talk, because there was this whole, the trans panic wheeze from a couple of years ago was like, oh my God, it's a trend, right? All these people, and the clear implication being people are being somehow indoctrinated into it, or doing it because it's trendy or whatever the fuck, right? And it's like
same arguments that were thrown at us, obviously.
Yeah, that as well. But also, it's like, okay, so here's a chart from the 1900s of people who are identifying as left-handed. Notice any similarities. Now, what happened here when the curve started going up? Oh, right, they changed the law so you could and then suddenly people feel free to be who they are, and that's
exactly.
And then what happened after that? Oh, look, it plateaued. Oh, what's happened to our latest census figures? Oh, look, 0.5% of the population. That's about where we thought it was. That's your argument is bullshit. The numbers don't agree with you. Go away.
And you know what? It's almost like futile to argue with them on that basis, because it doesn't matter.
No, they're not. They're not the reality-based community.
No, right? And also they're not sincere. They're not. Half the time they're not sincere. They just don't. They're doing exactly what they do with us, with gay people. They're trying to obfuscate the argument. They're trying to throw bullshit to try and obfuscate the fact that they're just fucking bigots, and they want someone to kick down against. And a lot of them have sold themselves to, like Glinner. They've sold themselves to it so utterly. They've got nothing else. They've lost everything else as a result. Now they're these very sad, miserable people who they literally cannot, for fear of losing everything. They literally cannot divorce themselves from it.
And they're so I mean, not that my empathy and sympathy remains entirely with the trans peoples whose lives are being made in misery by these fucking idiots.
Fuck them.
But they do look miserable. They do look really, really, really unhappy.
Every
and I do occasionally think, like,
every single one of them.
Don't have to do this. You could do something else.
And then you compare them to like the incredible vivacity and expression of like trans people who tend to be like expressive in other ways as well. There's it's a community that tends to be very expressive and very like engaged with what it's trying to express. And it's like, do you want the rainbow, or do you want sort of like Wet Weekend in Bridlington? I know which one for.
Oh, I mean, like, trans Twitter is fucking awesome. Like, I'm really, really lucky. I've got, I follow a lot of trans people on Twitter now, and it's just like, oh my God, it's fucking amazing. Also, like, for me,
trans peeps.
You spend 5 minutes there, and it, like, that whole lie about the humanist left just gets demolished.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's the funny thing, isn't it? You know, there's this whole joke. There is this whole preconception, of course, as well, that somehow there's some sort of like massive sort of like humorless trans juggernaut in culture that's crushing comedians and whatnot.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've never engaged with any trans people ever in any medium whatsoever, because trans people are fucking hilarious.
But also, like, I think back
everything, you know.
I think back to like, do you not remember in 1997 when the biggest stand-up comedian on the planet was Eddie fucking Izzard? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't have to be a fan, but like that guy was huge.
Yeah.
He was selling out fucking arenas being funny. Like, and it was legit. Right. Like, come on.
That's it. The difference is, of course, is that many of those comedians who are complaining haven't changed their material since like the 1990s.
Yes, that's the problem.
And they really feel threatened by that. They feel threatened by the fact that they can't. Oh, maybe they have to think about what they say for the first time ever in their fucking lives. And that's the issue.
I also think with comedy as well, there is this interesting thing about, like, I mean, the big defense is always like, oh, well, you laughed, so it's okay. And I always think, like, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, like, the laugh impulse is an interesting one, because we were talking about horror earlier and the connection between horror and comedy. I think one of the ways it's interesting is I think that laughter is often an involuntary response, you know, and like you can laugh. And the fact that you've laughed doesn't actually necessarily mean that you think what you just saw was funny. You can be laughing because you were surprised. You can be laughing because you're shocked.
People laugh at funerals all the time.
Yeah.
People there is this absolute phenomena where people, for reasons they don't understand, for reasons they can't necessarily control, laugh involuntarily at funerals, you know. And there are lots of theories as to why it is, and one of them is that it's almost like it's a bit like the expectorations of, say, Tourette's, you know, where it's this well of emotion and your body doesn't know how to express it. And it comes out in this way, right?
I'm not any kind of biologist, but I feel like the wiring between the laugh and cry impulse are very, very close. I feel like that bundle of wires are very, very tightly knit together, and maybe even interconnected in some really weird, like, confusing ways. And I just, like, you know, it's a weird thing, but I just think that it's so simplistic to be like, you know, oh, I got a laugh with it, so that makes it okay. And it's like,
so that's somehow approbation.
Yeah,
not necessarily, man. Not
I don't think that's the alibi you think it is. You
Definitely
know? Like
not.
I mean, I had a direct experience of this years ago. I was at a stand-up comedian, and they did this. They did it doesn't matter what it was about. I mean, but they did a particular routine that, actually thinking back, and it was pretty offensive. It was pretty bad, and it dated really hilariously badly as well, because it was about. I mean, the specifics of it was, and it was, to be clear, it was a black stand-up comedian who was delivering the routine, but he was doing this routine about how a black man would never be a Formula One driver. And it was this whole kind of about pimp my ride car stuff, all this kind of stereotype shit. And it was like, and it, of course, like, literally 6 months later, Lewis Hamilton wins.
I was going to say, what?
Well, don't you look like a fucking idiot?
Yeah.
But like, what I remember about the routine was like the jokes weren't good, but this particular comedian actually he did have exquisite timing.
Yeah.
And his delivery was good. Like, he had this kind of, you know, very kind of staccato delivery that was really kind of punchy. And I remember sitting there laughing, thinking, this isn't funny. Like, genuinely, I was laughing because everything about the situation, the fact that everyone around me was laughing, the fact that it was a comedy show, the fact that this guy was on stage with a microphone, delivering these lines in a comedic mode with the rhythm, you know, of laugh, you know, that kind of comedic rhythm, and he was very, very good at that. He was a skilled performer in that sense. So I laughed. But like, the idea that means that because I laughed in that situation, I endorse that routine or that political point of view or any of that, it's like, nah,
it's manifestly untrue, isn't it?
And that's and then the dominoes really start falling, right? Because then it's like you realize that applies to all of this quote unquote problematic art too. Like, I don't fucking agree with Ian Fleming about anything. I mean, he's dead. But if he was alive, I wouldn't agree with him about, I mean, literally not a fucking thing, I don't think. there's no common ground between me and Ian Fleming. That doesn't mean I can't enjoy the fucking James Bond books.
Absolutely.
Like, and that doesn't mean by enjoying them that I think that they are right about what they say about the world.
No.
They're not. Part of the enjoyment is how hilariously wrong they are about almost everything.
I was talking to some friends about this recently because we were talking about the whole. We were talking about C.S. Lewis, of course, and my response to C.S. Lewis is always very complex because I learned to read with the Narnia books. Yeah. You know, before I went to school, I was reading the Narnia books. I learned to read with those books, and they were my gateway into metaphysical fiction, which is what I write. You know, it's the nature of my imagination. So I will always, always, always respond to them in that way. You know, they will always have a certain soft spot in my mind, but obviously C.S. Lewis was an incredible anti-Semite and a racist and a bigot on a number of levels, religious bigot notwithstanding. His metaphysics was pretty foul, you know, but that complexity of response has actually become part of the experience.
I mean, the one for me on that actually is Ender's Game.
Yeah, of course. Wow.
Is I cannot tell you how important that book is to me, and it's a weird one. Like I forget, and then I come back to it every now and then. And I'm like, oh fuck yeah, Ender's Game.
That was a really big one for you, wasn't it? When you were younger.
Gigantic. I cannot tell. I mean, that was probably up there with it, and I probably read it about the same time. I was probably like 10, 11, 12, somewhere around that age when I read it. So
the right age as well.
The perfect age.
Right age for that.
Yeah. And it absolutely fucking blew me away. I still think it's one of the, and I do genuinely think it's a great book. I think it's a great novel. Like it deserved the awards it won that year. It was, you know, it probably was the best book that was written that year in those genres. I think it's genuinely groundbreaking and powerful and brilliant. It is a brilliant piece of writing in many important respects. And I think it's probably evil. I think it's actually, because I actually think I've grown to the position of thinking that Ender's Game is actually an apologia for fascism. I actually think it is. I think that's what it is. And I obviously can't see inside Orson Scott Card's heart and head. I don't know if that's what
you kind of don't need to, though, because
I have some hints based on where he spent his money and what political.
He's made it fairly plain.
There's certainly things I would not agree with him about, but I think it's interesting that. So my relationship with that book is really complicated because because at its core, you see, the thing about Ender's Game that is so powerful, at its core, it is a story about a bullied child, and its depictions of what it feels like to be a bullied child are just exquisitely rendered, and they're done really simply, and they're done without sentiment, and the horror of that very mundane, ordinary situation that, you know, millions of people go through is so brilliantly and painfully realized. And part of the fact, the part of the reason I think it's such an evil genius is because it uses that child being bullied as the moral justification for everything that child does.
Yes, so it kind of like it appeals to a very common experience that it knows that its target audience will resonate with, and then uses it to steer them down a particular ideological path, right?
Or justify it, at least. The way it works, so like, because I mean, have you read Ender's Game? I don't know if
No, I haven't. I only really heard about it on the back of like Orson Scott Card being a dick about.
I tell you what I'll do at some point, because neither of us want to put any more money in Card's pocket, but I will find my paperback at some point.
Yeah, I would love to give it. Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I imagine a lot of people are going through it with Potter at the moment.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I mean, again, millions of people literally going through it with Potter.
And it's really hard. I mean, I feel for them. I really do, because those stories were important to people. Like whole generations of people. They were very important to people. They're not my thing. I don't like them at all. I'll be honest. I've never liked them.
No.
But they are important to people, and I really feel for them. I really do when they're wrestling with this now.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's a hard thing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the Potters are a good example of the sense that like with C.S. Lewis, that it's not just that they've been written by someone who turned out to be a bad person, but like the badness is kind of baked into.
Oh, it's in them. Too. Yeah, it's so in them. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's arguments for slavery in the Potter books. There's classism. There's all sorts of stuff.
Some quite intense anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism. That totally
seems to go weirdly under remarked, considering
doesn't it? Doesn't it just? I mean, it literally has hook-nosed goblin bankers who are trying.
Like, really? I think Jon Stewart noticed, but he's about the only person.
Well, Ursula K. Le Guin noticed. She called them mean-spirited and amoral. Philip Pullman noticed. He really doesn't like them.
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
He had a bit of a go at Rowling at one point.
Right too.
Barker's had a go at Rowling.
Yeah.
Quite.
But
popular.
no, I mean, Ender's Game definitely, because I won't spoil it because I do think you should. But basically.
I know of it. I know of the mythology and
the outlines of it. But basically, what Ender's Game does is it uses the. So it takes the particular instance of the bully kid, and it exposits that. I mean, the basic exposition or the basic thesis that it puts forward is like, if you're being bullied, you do what you got to do to stop being bullied. Right,
I see. Regardless, yeah.
And it's like, that's a complicated moral position. And you could justify it, or you could quibble with it, or and there's edge cases and limit. And it's one of those things where it's like, on the surface of it, you're like, yeah, maybe. You know what I mean?
It seems right, but when you start giving it some consideration.
But then what it does, and it does this kind of very. I mean, this is deliberate. It then starts to try and apply that logic to a national level.
I see, right. And
I think at that point you can immediately see, oh no, don't do that.
And it becomes different, right? Yeah, the dynamic becomes somewhat different. You're not on the schoolyard anymore, right?
Suddenly you start, hang on, I think I hear jackboots.
Yeah.
Innocent, I think I hear.
Yeah, right.
I think
it's for your protection. Yeah?
I think I can smell books burning.
Yeah, and bones maybe.
Yeah, it's fucking impressive. But again, why it has value is because it does actually give you an insight into the fascist mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
Remembering that a lot of fascists, I mean, there's a double think, because there's always double think with fascists, because their ideology doesn't make any sense. But one of the layers of double think that you do get is, on some level, fascists believe that they are the ones being persecuted.
Yes.
On other levels, they know fucking full well that they're not. But it is one of the levels that they're operating on. There's this enormous, endless sense of grievance.
Yeah, all the time. I mean, it's a part of the projectionism of the whole snowflake thing, isn't it? They are such fucking snowflakes, right? Absolutely. They're so sensitive.
But it's amazing how Ender's Game does that from the inside, and it does it by giving you a genuinely sympathetic lead character. And Ender is, I think, genuinely sympathetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the difference between Scott Card's writing and say Ayn Rand's, you know?
Yeah.
Because none of her protagonists are likable at all.
No, I genuinely, part of the reason that novel is so important to me, and why my relationship to it has been so fraught, and why apparently we'll talk about it any fucking chance I get. It's because I still, and this is kind of the point, if we're talking about, because I take back nothing I've said. It's genuinely, I think it's an evil book. I actually think it might be evil. I still love Ender. I love that kid.
Yeah, it's an odd thing, isn't it? I mean,
sorry for him, and I feel very, very powerful, because Ender is the bright kid who doesn't fit in, and is bullied.
Right. It's the Fountainhead. It's Ayn Rand's the Fountainhead in that regard. I mean, it's similar. It's a similar thing, you know.
Yeah.
But in the horror community, we have Lovecraft. So
true.
And also we have Stoker, right?
Yeah.
Who was also an awful man.
Yeah. True. Well, and even in I mean H.G. Wells was sci-fi, but he did some bordering on horror stuff as well. And Wells was was a good socialist in some senses, but he was also a eugenicist. So that's not good.
Poe married his 13-year-old cousin.
Yeah, he did that. Yeah.
Believed heavily in slavery as well.
Yeah.
You know? It's
And I mean,
yeah.
like, Poe was. I mean, I know there's arguments about Lovecraft, right? I know that there's a genuine Lovecraft. There's a genuine kind of critical churn. Like, actually, was he any good? And there's arguments on both sides, and I get that. Like, genuinely,
I think it's ultimately
contested ground.
it's a matter of taste.
I think
when
it
it
is.
comes
I
to
think,
Lovecraft,
and I respect that, and I respect people on both sides of that argument. People who like it, people who don't. Like, I get it, because I kind of go back and forth a bit myself, to be honest. Poe, on the other hand, I struggle to hear a counter argument. I think if you read Mask of the Red Death, tell me that's not one of the best fucking things you have ever read.
He's not
ever.
just one of the best like writers who ever lived. He's one of the best poets too.
Yeah.
His poetry is sublime.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. I mean, it's exquisite. He is like, it's from the mouths of angels and demons. It's wonderful stuff. I mean, I always go back to the classic, which is The Raven.
Sure.
Just have you ever spoken that out aloud?
No, I haven't. I don't think I've ever read it.
Oh, it tastes wonderful.
Right.
The Raven, once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. As I pondered, nearly napping, all at once there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping on my chamber door. It's so beautiful. The Raven is one of my favorite poems ever written, and it's like the finest cut diamond. It's an exercise in linguistic perfection.
Yeah.
And it's awe-inspiring. It's awe-inspiring. You can't quite get over the luminous darkness of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's a weird one, because this is one that comes up perpetually, separating the art from the artist and all that kind of stuff. And I think where I land on this one, and I may be repeating myself at this point, but what the hell? It's like, I think for me, the politics of the artist matter a lot less than the commitment the artist makes towards honesty. I remember I think one of the most important thing King says is on writing is he says, you can write about anything you want. Write about plumbers in space, write about dragons, write about anything. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
All that matters is it has to be honest.
It has to be honest. Yes, it has to be sincere, right?
Yeah. And his thing was he said, I will tell you this, if you take seriously your commitment to writing, your days in polite society are numbered.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And I think he's dead right about that. He's dead right about that. And part of why that's such a powerful lesson to learn is, even where the artist themselves is flawed, and let's face it, we're all flawed, but even where they're badly flawed, those flaws themselves will inform the art in interesting ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will get some truth from it that they felt, whether it was wrong or objectionable or whatever. It will give you a portrait into how they think and how they imagine and how they feel. And that's fascinating, right?
That truth may condemn them and sucks to be them, but it still makes it great art, I think.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I got to with Ender's Game for sure. And it's where it's because I really am. I'm going to do some project on the Fleming Bond run at some point, because I actually think they're fucking incredible. I mean, they're awful. They're incredible.
It's so weird, right? It is. You're all right. They're awful and incredible at the same time.
And I really want to do a deep dive, because it's that thing of why do I keep reading these fucking books? So I'll have to find out. I'll have to write about it or do a podcast about it or something.
That sounds loads of fun. Actually,
I think it
does sound loads of fun.
Well, I finally read them all in order. I finally did the canon, because I read them out of order a lot of times, but I finally sat down and did them beginning to end. And, and I was like, okay, yeah, this was a fun project. I should do something with this.
Brilliant. Well, shall we bring this to a close?
Yeah.
Because it would be. I think we're about nearing the 3-hour mark now. I think we've done rather.
We were just getting started, really.
Well, actually, so do I. So I would love to have you back on to do another of these. That'd be great. That'd be fabulous.
I don't really know what this was, but
I don't either, to be honest. But I think it was really fun, and I think we could do it again.
Yeah, fine by me. Yeah,
sure. Fabulous. So before we do go, I'm sure. I know you've got stuff to to pimp out this time.
It's gonna be My Life of Horror Volume 2. So the ebook is out now. It came out right at the arse end of December because I was desperate to try and make the 23 award season. Not that it's going to get nominated, but just so My Life in Horror Volume 2. If you're familiar at all with My Life in Horror, you know what to expect. But Volume 2 is it's the last 5 years of the columns I wrote for Ginger Nuts of Horror, and it's bigger, it's more personal. I go into there are some classics in there as well, but I get into some really esoteric, weird stuff. There's one of my favorite essays in there is about the black hole ride at Alton Towers. It's about the old we were talking about roller coasters earlier. It's about the roller coaster, the black hole, and and a little bit about Twilight of Terror and the and Space Mountain in Florida. Alongside Nightmare on Elm Street and loads of other stuff. So Gangs of New York, all kinds of things. So that's out in ebook now. It'll be out in paperback and hardback by the end of January. But that's if you've enjoyed in particular this conversation, because the My Life in Horror essays that I've written, Volume 1 and Volume 2, they're a series of essays with me interrogating a particular piece of art. There is an Ender's Game essay in Volume 1, I think.
There is.
No. Is it Volume 1 or Volume 2?
Yeah, it's Volume 1, I think.
It's Volume 1, yeah. There is, anyway, one of them's got an Ender's Game. Buy them both, just to make sure you get it.
Absolutely.
But, and it's this kind of conversation. I mean, I'm having it with myself, so it's not as good because George is amazing. But it's still, it's me trying to pick apart, why? Why do I give such a shit about this particular thing? Why does it upset me? Why does it scare me? Why does it whatever? So if you've enjoyed this particular podcast, My Life in Horror Volume 1 and Volume 2 especially just come out, go pick it up. That would be fantastic.
It's where all this comes from, by the way, guys. Links down below. As for myself, My Life in Horror is continuing over on the Ginger Nuts of Horror.
Yes, it is.
Kindly handed that over to me. So there is already the first part of a 3-part article up there, which I think is kind of a manifesto. It's kind of like a mission statement. How this is if I do fully intend to publish these as you have, Kit. These are going to be huge. if this is an indication, this is going to be a huge volume. So yes, if you are interested, the articles are still ongoing. But from my perspective now, and when I finish my run, as and when that will be, I will hand it over to someone else, and so on and so forth. It will go on. Wouldn't it be great if, in 10 years' time, we can look back and there's this huge, just expanse of material from horror writers. I just love the idea, and that's what this channel is about too. What this show is going to be about, all being well. As for my written work, guys, links to it all over at strangeplaygrounds.com. Most recently, there was the Book of Queer Saints last year. There's a couple of things being published this year as well, very, very soon. I will put links to all of them down below. Kit, thank you so much for doing this, the inaugural episode of Our Lives in Horror.
No, absolute honor. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do with the column. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you do with this show as well. I'm really excited. So, no, thank you.
I want to get as many people on as I can. I want to get people on because I'm interested, I'm fascinated. I want to get the ball rolling. I want to see everybody basically dissecting themselves and whatnot.
Good stuff.
Because that's what it's all about. Well, thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Cool.